I'll call this meeting of the Lane County Board of Health to order. Good morning and welcome to Harris Hall. It's a pleasure being here today, beautiful day. A couple of adjustments to the agenda, actually small announcements before we move into the adjustments to the agenda. Today I'll be here for the very beginning of the meeting, and I've been selected. I'm on a jury on a trial, and I'll be leaving shortly after the meeting begins this morning. So when you see me leave, it's not because I don't like you. It's because they'll send uniforms to get me if I don't leave. So, the other thing I'd like to mention, a little bit impromptu, but our county administrator today is having a birthday. We'd like to wish you a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Steve Mokrahysky.
Thank you very much.
Then do we have any adjustments to the agenda?
For the Board of Health.
For the board, this is the Board of Health meeting. The Board of Health meeting is convened. Adjustments to the agenda? Then I'll open for public comments. Ms. Ashbridge, do we have any public comments for the Board of Health? I will mention that general public comments will be held subsequent to the Board of Health meeting after the convening of the regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, which will be conducted by the Vice Chair. Then Commissioners' response and/or remonstrances. I see none. Any emergency business today? I see none. This could go pretty quickly. Then employee recognition. Today we have employee recognition. Mr. Mokrahysky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'd like to invite Dr. Patrick Ludke and Dr. Jocelyn Warren, an MD and a PhD, up to the table here, and Alicia Hayes and Karen Gaffney, if we have enough room for everybody, to come on up. And we're really pleased. You know, we get to do these employee recognitions. This is one of the my favorite things that we're able to do at the board meetings, is recognize the outstanding team of leaders and staff that we have in the organization. Oftentimes we're recognizing employees that the board doesn't regularly see or know really well. Today we get to recognize two employees that you work rather closely with and you do see regularly. I'm looking at Dr. Ludke to see, do you have any poems for us this morning that you'd like
poems today, sir.
We always look forward to your colorful and expressive way of teaching and leading us. This is really an exciting opportunity, and I'll just share some comments with you about the recognition here. Lane County Public Health Manager Jocelyn Warren and Lane County Senior Health Officer Patrick Ludke have been chosen to join 19 public health departments from around the country as part of a select cohort of leaders working to transform the role of local public health in organizations and communities around the country. The program is part of the Kresge Foundation's Emerging Leaders in Public Health and drew applicants from across the nation. During this 18-month program, Dr. Warren and Dr. Ludke will participate in an action-oriented program focused on the design and implementation of a transformative concept that shifts or expands the capacity of their local department. They'll receive a grant of up to $125,000, as well as coaching and technical assistance to evolve the ideas into action. Not only a great honor to be selected and a great recognition of the quality of talent that we have in this organization, but this also helps to accelerate and extend our health department's efforts to strengthen the impact of public health in our community. I'll say I've had the opportunity to attend some meetings on a statewide level, public health related meetings regionally and statewide, where there are folks from other counties around the state, and people look to Lane County. I mean, we really are the leader in public health, I think, around the state. Even though we're not the largest, we're not the Portland metro area, people really look to us, and it again is I think an example of the type of talent that we have in this organization. How many people said at the that regional meeting, they got up and introduced themselves and they said, "I'm here because Dr. Warren told me I needed to be here."
Hey, that's my story.
Right. So I just wanted to have the opportunity to recognize both of these outstanding individuals. And Alicia, if you have some additional comments to add, and then I know that Dr. Ludke and Dr. Warren are not shy about sharing their thoughts as well.
No, thank you, Steve. Commissioners, one of the reasons we have a strong public health department is because of our Board of Health and because of the work you do. So really, while we recognize them, we couldn't be here without you. A couple of facts I just want to share with you. This is for emerging leaders, and when I heard that, I felt a little bad, given that Dr. Pat is only a month younger than I am, and I'm feeling like maybe I still should be doing something. But then I found out, no, he's the mentor, and Dr. Warren is the emerging leader. So I'm feeling much better about my ability to do very little. Anyhow, it's just a pleasure to work with these folks every day. Their commitment and their expertise, and mostly their passion, is what makes them a success. And I'm really looking forward to this opportunity and what it's going to bring to our community, not just the skill and ability these two will bring and learn, but what that means for our community and the innovation that we're looking at doing in the project. So thank you for giving us the chance to recognize them and to kind of announce to the community what we're doing here. So do either of you want to share?
Well, I think the reason that we can be successful too is not only the Board of Health, which we do appreciate very much, and also the administration of Health and Human Services has been very supportive, and that's going to be really critical and key in going forward to the success of this project, because it involves better integration between public health and primary care in the community health centers. So that's an exciting opportunity, and without the leadership and the support of the whole department as well as the other divisions, it wouldn't be possible.
I thought you were going to say how many hundreds of people applied, and yet only 20 were chosen, and we were one of them, which I'm proud of. We did have some cross-conversation with others in the state who had applied, and we were the only ones in Oregon that got it as well. I feel pretty good about that. And finally, there was enough pressure already on us. This is a lot to do in 18 months, and visioning and looking at the horizon instead of looking at our feet. But I think this event has put even more pressure on us, because now the commissioners are aware. Oh gosh.
We better go get busy.
Well, thank you for being here this morning. And Dr. Ludke, while I have your attention, my thumb, I've been kind of... Oh, I'll hold out.
Jury duty will fix that, sir.
Any questions or comments from the commission? Well, we are very proud, and as Mr. Mokrahajski mentioned, I was at the regional meeting was it November? I believe it was November, in Albany, and people were here from beyond the region, even from all over the state, and people were asked why they were at the meeting, and I was kind of down the list, and I thought, I'm going to say because Dr. Warren told me to be here. But at least 9 other people said that prior to me, so I didn't say it. But it was the truth. The reason I was there is because Dr. Warren told me to be there. So thank you for everything you do. The people of Lane County are, most people don't even know about your work. They don't even know about the extent and the depth that you alter lives, that you save lives in this community. Actually save people's lives in this community. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Don't go too far.
yeah, stay here.
Okay. Handing the gavel.
I think,
Wanna get
are
started?
we going to do photos now?
We'll do that when you go through that.
Then we're going to move along, and this isn't a good opportunity for me to step out rather than interfere in the middle. Without apology, I'm leaving. And turning the gavel over to Commissioner Bozievich. If the trial ends early, or if we're dismissed for any reason, I'll be back. Otherwise, I wish you all the best of luck. I'll put my pin on and off I go.
Thank you, Chair Farr. So we'll move on to item 6A of the Board of Health, which is the semi-annual Board of Health report. And it looks like we have Karen Gaffney and, of course, Dr. Warren and Dr. Ludke. So, Karen, go ahead.
Morning, Commissioners. I have a brief introduction to this item, and then really we'll turn the bulk of the presentation over to Pat and Jocelyn. As you know, as a Board of Health, one of your responsibilities is to receive the semi-annual report where we share information with you about needs in our community, data, update you on issues of import to the health of the community. We've submitted a written report, and for those who are watching, that's available online. It includes a one-page summary on each of the divisions in Health and Human Services. Historically, this report has been a broad, health in its broadest sense, so our entire department. The memo that we submitted for you for our report this time has a particular focus around some data in terms of specific indicators in the community, and so we're going to focus our presentation on the content of that cover memo, but certainly we've reserved enough time for questions and comments, and we're happy to talk about any of the other divisions and the information that's in the report as well. well. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Pat and Jocelyn.
Okay. I'm gonna move to the first slide.
We need to put them up.
Oh, look at that. Sorry about that delay. Didn't realize. All right,
Pretty blank.
it's spinning. Here we go. Okay, you're on.
Great. Well, thank you for having us here today. We're very excited to share this data. We're going to take a slightly different approach, as Karen said, for this Board of Health report. We're using a life course health perspective, which means recognizing that a lot of the consequences in older age of health actually have roots in childhood and even before that. So a lot of our current health care could be characterized as too much, too late, as healthcare dollars are spent disproportionately in later life on diseases that are already well established, chronic diseases. The public health approach, of course, is to prevent disease by addressing the upstream determinants of health. Many of our preventable chronic medical, dental, and behavioral health problems in the U.S. have roots in childhood. Approximately 80% of U.S. healthcare dollars are spent on chronic disease treatment.
So we'll start with a series of graphs here and then finish with a summary slide at the end. The first of the series of graphs are here before you. Infant mortality rate, we are approaching the national average. You can see that there was a dip. We are the salmon color in Lane County, and the greenish color is the state of Oregon as a whole. We had some increases over the course of several years, but then in the last couple of years, we've had some minor decreases. Outside of the realm of statistical significance, so meaning it is statistical significant, which is important. So some of our efforts are indeed bearing fruit, so to speak. Low birth weight peaked at 7.4% in 2013 and has declined a bit to 6.3%. Low birth weight has many causes. Tobacco is one of the very common causes. Our tobacco use rate in Oregon and in Lane County is higher than the national average. And that's one of the main causes that we continue to work on with our CHIP and with other programs, as you well know. Our immunization rate, you've heard many of us in public health talk about our immunization rate. We continue to have challenges in the state and here in our county. We have too many immunization exemptions for kids in school and daycare, and not enough of our adults either. The 2-year-old rate, we'd love it to be 95+%, which would allow us to have community immunity, as you've heard that phrase before. We're down in the around 88% for 2-year-olds. Next slide, please. So our abuse and neglect rate is also elevated. Nationally, the average is 9.2 per 1,000. You can see ours is up above 15. This is something we've reported on before. There have been a good many initiatives at the public health level and at other levels, even in school systems, to try to address this rate, but it continues to be a challenge for us going forward. Next, please.
Some of the other issues that we're looking at and following in public health are rates of asthma. Asthma, as you see, is increasing among youth, and it's higher than the state overall. Also, obesity, which has a lot of implications for young people as they grow older. That's also increasing and higher in Lane County than what we see at the state average.
Smoking in youth, again, a topic we've talked a great deal about, decreased for quite some time, mainly, we think, due to the initiatives at the city and the county level. But recently, over the last 18 to 24 months, we've seen a slight increase. It's unsure exactly what to make of that. Is this a one-time increase and will regress to the mean as statisticians stay in the next year, or will it continue to increase? We'll watch that closely. E-cigarettes, however, have risen quite quickly. As you know, we've basically quadrupled across the country in the course of just 4 years. You can see the data from the Healthy Teens survey. The salmon color is 11th graders for our county, and the green is for Oregon as a whole. Too much e-cigarette use as well, something we need to continue to watch. Next, please.
Marijuana use is also common among our youth, with about 1 in 5 reporting use in the past 30 days. It's about the same as the state level reports. But alcohol continues to be the most common substance used by 11th graders, with 1 out of 3 reporting use by our 11th graders in the past 30 days.
Prescription drug use in Lane County continues to be a concern to us. The readily availability, part of that is overprescription by providers, something we're addressing at multiple different levels in public health. And some of our partners in the community are trying to address that as well. You can see again our numbers. The salmon color is Lane County. We're up above the state average, something we would not like to continue. And suicide, we've talked briefly about suicide. Our suicide rates statewide are higher than the national average, including all age groups. For youth, ages 10 to 24, you can see that we're below the state average, but again, more than we would like to see.
So we just want to put some of these data in context. Chronic conditions have been steadily increasing in the U.S. among children over time. Now 30% of U.S. children have chronic health problems or special health needs. And of growing concern, of course, is the number of mental and behavioral health conditions. There's been a shift in childhood disease burden over the last several decades from medical and physical conditions to behavioral and developmental conditions that reflect changes in the context of children's lives. Today's parents have lower earning capacity and often face higher costs for food, housing, healthcare, and childcare. Interventions and policies, and among these we include the home visiting programs, WIC, as well as high-quality preschool, family-friendly workplace policies, and pediatric care with a strong focus on prevention can act as protective factors and moderate the impact of early life processes. And that concludes our presentation.
And Chair Bozovich, I would put a little bit of a bookend on this piece, and the first question the public might ask is, so what are you going to do about all of this? And I would take us back to the conversations we've had about our community health improvement plan, and specifically the goals in that plan that speak to those social determinants of health. As Jocelyn, the second bullet on this particular slide, I think it was the second one, that talks about housing and homelessness and the context that children are growing up in is a huge focus of our plan. And then the second goal that really looks a lot at early childhood development, increased screening and assessment, that those are the pieces in terms of our approach to community health that our collaboration with our community partners to really focus at changing some of these conditions. So at this point, we'll turn it back over to you for questions or comments.
So questions? Commissioner Lyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the things that wasn't mentioned, and I'd like to kind of talk about a little bit this morning, is the opiate issue, and it's very significant. And but also, it's just not here. This is a top priority with the National Association of Counties as well. And my question is, what can we actually do as a public health authority, as Lane County, working with our partners, not only statewide but nationally, especially when you hear of people that are, deaths, or people who become very, very ill based on properly prescribed medication, like from their physicians. What can we do as a public health authority, not only here in Oregon, but work with our national partners? I just, I think this is ongoing. So it's one of these things where I'm not expecting like some, answer to take up the entire time all morning long, because we probably could. But I think it's a start on what we can do in our role here, and just working with our partners, not only statewide, but around the country.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich and Commissioner Lyken. That's an excellent question. We're actually doing a lot in different parts of our department, and I think there's more we could do. So I'm going to toss it. I know each of you in different ways is working on this in the community.
We are indeed. So we're both jotting down things quickly. There are a variety of things we are doing and others that we want to try, ranging from drug take-backs. So it's pretty clear that there's too many pills out there, and there's a lot of different ways to potentially address that. So look at prescribing behaviors of providers who are licensed to prescribe these pills. That's something we're doing. So awareness in the physician community, the nurse practitioner, PA community. And for those pills that are already out there and they're no longer needed, you had your surgery, you're over your hip pain or your knee replacement pain, and what can we do with those for safe disposal? We're working on that as well. There's something called the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, PDMP, and that is an opportunity for any prescriber in our state to see where their patients are getting medications. Are they only getting them from me, or are they getting them from other providers out there? And in Lane County, only 75% of our providers are signed up for that. So we have an active program to get close to 100% signed up, so they know if there are other prescriptions coming to their patient. In addition, we had, on the other end of this, looking at preventing death from overdose. Last summer, I believe it was July, August, we worked with one of our partners, the HIV Alliance, on what's called a naloxone distribution program. Naloxone is the medication that can reverse the overdose of opiates. So we, using the health officer license, my medical license, they're able to purchase this product, train people on how to use it appropriately if they happen to be an injection drug user themselves, or if they come upon regularly people who do, like police officers. And we get monthly reports from the HIV Alliance of how many trainings they've had, how many people have received the medication, how many times it's been used and resulted in a saved life. So those are several I'm aware of. I bet Jocelyn has others that we're working on.
And a lot of that work is being done as part of an opiate overdose prevention program that is funded by the state, and we're funded as a region. We work really closely with Douglas County, actually. And then there are several other regions that have been identified throughout the state because they have elevated rates of opiate use and overdose. So that work continues, and we have that, and a lot of the work that's being done with the PDMP and with HIV Alliance and the drug takebacks is done under sort of the auspices of that grant work.
And I think the other thing I would add to that constellation is the work that's happening in our behavioral health division around treatment, because there is such an enormous demand for people who are addicted, whether it's to prescription opiates or to heroin. We've expanded our methadone treatment program significantly over the last several years, and we're working fast and furiously in our primary care environment to introduce a Suboxone treatment opportunity for people to engage in treatment in their primary care setting. And so we're in the process of training our physicians and setting up protocols so that we can really expand access to treatment for people who are addicted.
Mr. Chair, just one follow-up.
Sure.
So what would be helpful for me and I maybe for all members of the board, and I'll let them speak for themselves on this, but what would be helpful for me, so let's say we have a passing meeting with Congressman DeFazio or Senator Wyden. Just a one-page summary on what maybe the conversations we can have with our delegation on what are some of the things the federal government can be working on, our delegation, what they can really, and I think really with Senator Wyden's probably in the most key position when it comes to healthcare related issues in particular, but just a one-page summary would be very helpful, and just to, because, and we can, to me, I can absolutely clarify, this comes from our public health leadership and really what can help us here in Lane County. Because I think what happens out of NACO, you're going to get more of a broad-based cookie-cutter approach of nationally this is what, but I think you'll find each county maybe has a different issue going on. And so that would be helpful, I think, would be having a one-page summary that we can have in our hands at all time if we're going to run into our federal delegation. And one other thing, so on the slide, you had the issue of it was youth neglect, I think is what that was.
Child abuse and neglect?
Yeah, and so child abuse and neglect. So thank you. So my wife and I are very involved in Hosea Youth Services. I mean, this has become our organization we just want to support. And what's interesting, when you talk to some of the kids, and breaks my heart that they feel more safe in a sleeping bag sleeping on a street than they do at home. And that is one of the most unacceptable things I've ever heard. It's stunning to me. And I'm thinking, how could you possibly feel safe living on a street than in your own home? But that is, we've talked to them face to face. And I get it. It takes you everything you've got to not break down in front of them because you want to try to stay strong as you possibly can. So that is an issue I think that, we can continue to work on and really with so many of our different nonprofit partners here but that's a boots on the ground issue if there ever was one. And we're talking high school age and younger. And I just can't even believe it's happening here, but yet that's the reality we face. So just looking at that in the graph, I'm not going to say at this point in time I'm shocked because I've seen it face to face. But I appreciate that, and I'm glad that's on there because we need to continue to bring awareness to that over and over again. But thank you for the opiate conversation because that's going to be key going forward. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you, Commissioner Leiken. I just really want to appreciate the fact that you volunteer your time on this issue because I think you're absolutely right. It's for the one-on-one young people you touch, it's hugely important. And then from a public health perspective, over the last several years, we've talked to you about adverse childhood experiences and what the impact is on the future trajectory of young people's health as they become adults. Both their mental health, substance abuse, and physical health conditions really are impacted significantly by those early childhood experiences.
Any other questions or comments from the board? So I just have a quick question. I can't remember the bill number up in Salem, but there was a bill that would require pharmacies to do drug take back and provide a secure system for drug take back. And it was a bill that I believe AOC, Association of Oregon Counties, endorsed. Are you aware whether that got past that last deadline of bills? Did it get a hearing? Is it still alive?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Bozovich, I do not know off the top of my head, but we can find out. And I know Alex will be here later today.
Yeah, I can ask Alex later also, but yeah, it was, Governance Committee endorsed it, and I'm pretty sure Legislative Committee up at AOC did also. So it's an important bill because the place that would be much more common for people to take drugs back to would be to their pharmacist, and the pharmacy is probably more equipped to keep those categorized and returned and inventoried safely. And the once every blue moon we have a collection point out at some fire station or something like that. Just it'd be easy for people consistently to come back to their pharmacies. I like the focus on the life course health development and looking at, we've talked over and over again about adverse childhood experiences and the impact that has in adulthood, whether it affects the cost of our criminal justice system or the amount of folks that end up on the street and homeless because of those adverse childhood experiences. I think, the board's already taken some, action ahead of even the state on e-cigarettes, and we just did on Tobacco 21, which will help with some of that life course health development. Like Commissioner Leiken, I have a real concern about youth homelessness and the fact that, if you're homeless for more than 14 days as a youth, you're 80% more likely to be chronically homeless as an adult. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so strongly support the 15th Night Initiative. And I'm a longtime supporter of Looking Glass services and helping those folks get off the street. It's interesting because I went to a presentation as part of the Justice Reinvestment Summit up in Salem about human trafficking. And the average kid that's away from home, runaway or homeless, is propositioned within 48 hours by somebody recruiting for the gangs that run human trafficking. And the average age of entry into that life is 12 to 14 for girls and 13 to 15 for boys. It's incredibly, so if a kid's out on the street for 14 days, they may have been propositioned or attempt to recruit 7 times in that period. So we really got to get these kids back off the street quickly and rehoused, and it's really important in a lot of ways. So I really appreciate that focus on youth as far as developing healthy lifestyles and preventing the adverse childhood experiences that will save us money in the long run, on care of adults in multiple ways. So I really appreciate the focus where you're going with your public health report today, and unless you have any follow-up comments.
No.
Thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that concludes our business for the Board of Health today. So I'm going to adjourn the Board of Health, and I'm going to call the regular meeting of the Board of Commissioners for Tuesday, May 2nd, 2017 to order. And the first thing I'll note under adjustments to the agenda that we are going to pull item 5B1 from the consent calendar for board discussion. I know that request was made by Commissioner Sorensen prior to the meeting. Are there any other adjustments to the agenda today? Seeing none, then we'll move on to public comment. And we give folks the opportunity to address the board at this time. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. I'll have a timer up here. If you'll just state your name and where you're from for the record once you get to the podium, it'll allows us to have a good record of public comment. So the first speaker is Heather Selecki, and the following speaker will be Jim Nesbitt. Heather?
Heather was sitting next to me. She's given me permission.
Okay.
To be with you. Honorable Commissioners, where's the administrator? Happy birthday, Steve. Yeah. Pleasure. It's good to be in front of you again. I haven't been here for probably 6 months. My name is Wayne Martin. I live in the Harlow neighborhood in Eugene. I moved here about 9 years ago. Bought a house downtown, Washington Street, retired from the ministry, and immediately got a call to see if I could come and do some rescue work with a church in Carmel, California. That's one of those invitations you actually don't even have to pray about. So I came out of retirement, ended my esteemed career at a church in Carmel. Then I moved back, and my life has been entirely different in the way I'm living it now compared to what I was able to do with a church of upper middle class and upper class people in Carmel. In 2012, I was asked to be on the steering committee of Opportunity Village, and I accepted. Since then, it feels as if I've had a calling, as would a minister, to be with, assist, engage with, pray with homeless people in Eugene and Springfield. I spend most of my time in some way doing those things. It's more exhausting than any other kind of ministry I had done. It feels more fulfilling. It's unending. And I think the best of all possible parts of it is that I'm not being paid. It's such a blessing, a gift, and a relief to do good work for no money. Or sometimes they'll say, just to be good for nothing. So I want to just leave you with this. I'm glad you're discussing issues like addiction, losing your life to substance. I see a lot of that every day. I still use my car to help move people, sometimes as many as 3 times a week from one location to another. I have a good relationship with Lieutenant David Natt of the Eugene Police Department, who offers an immense amount of professional, strategic advice in situations where I seek it. I have a good working relationship with a number of pastors, with a number of county agencies, and with city agencies. I'm on the board of Nightingale. I think what I want to see happen is, would you consider having a work session sometime? I'd like to be there if it's at all possible. On multiple aspects and just creative thinking and brainstorming and innovating ideas for what we currently are not doing, new things. Take this moment in these next 3 to 6 months by the tail and really come up with something exciting and new. Read about what other counties are doing and judiciaries are doing. And I'd like to be a part of that discussion. I have a few people that could join. Commissioner Sorensen has my contact information. We want to consider low barrier shelters. We want to consider more rest stops, one in each ward of the city. These are things that, with using your authority and your influence, you could probably assist the city in doing. Dawn to dusk, there's so many ideas, many of which would save us a lot of money in the county. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. We have Jim Nesbitt, followed by Mike Brinkley.
Good morning. I'm Jim Nesbitt. I'm from Springfield. I want to address the FEMA issues. Oregon should be at the forefront of conservative issues, improving the environment. Floodplains are really important to this environment for the fish and other wildlife, and trying to take state funds to pay for flood issues, it just seems really stupid to me. You shouldn't be building in those areas in the first place. We should be improving them and improving the environment and the fish runs and stuff like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Brinkley, followed by Ed McMahon.
Good morning. My name is Mike Brinkley. I'm a citizen, live here in Eugene. I fish, and I'm really happy that the FEMA decision is designed to protect listed fish, but that's not what I want to talk about this morning. I appreciate that. What I want to talk about is the whole idea of using public money, Lane County taxpayers' money, to support a private lawsuit which enables people to do irresponsible development in floodplains. That just doesn't make any common sense. And when you develop in floodplains, and then the floods come, and then we pay again because we use Lane County taxpayers' money, our money, to bail out people who have built irresponsibly in floodplains. Does that make any sense? Is that common sense? So any idea that you folks might have to join a private lawsuit and spend our money to encourage this kind of irresponsible building is not only dangerous, it's not only a bad idea, it's a terrible idea. And so if you commissioners support this, I guarantee you that we'll work overtime to help you find a new job. Thank you.
So Ed McMahon, followed by Frank Armandez. I'll get that one.
Good morning, Commissioners. Ed McMahon, the Executive Director of the Home Builders Association, located at 1065 River Road, Eugene. I'm here today encouraging you to participate in the coalition challenging the National Flood Insurance Program's Oregon Biological Opinion. Our industry believes it's important that Lane County become a member of the Oregonians for Floodplain Protection for several reasons. Following are just a few of our primary concerns with the biological opinion and the reasonable and prudent alternatives. First, It fails to take into consideration what efforts have already been made at the local level to protect local species and habitat. It also fails to seek any local input. Instead, simply imposes one-size-fits-all standard for every lot, whether it's in dense urban, ag, or forest land. It renders significant portions of the urban areas off limits to development, even though they're in the buildable land inventory. Harm, this is the one that really gets me, harm is assumed based on a broad-brushed approach that assumes the worst outcome or impact at every turn, not an accurate portrayal of the development in the floodplains today with their current existing regulations. Absolutely false. Effectively rendering the entire 100-year floodplain as critical habitat, when that was not the critical habitat. It's a land grab. Wouldn't it be smarter if the local community developed and implemented strategies that protected species that are right for each community based on their unique circumstances, not a set of one-size-fits-all development restrictions that do not even consider local regulations or local conditions? Our goal is to stop a tremendous overreach by the National Marine Fisheries Service. We want to keep the decisions in the hands of the state and the local government, not the National Marine Fisheries Service, particularly when they do not bother to consider local regulations as a part of their analysis. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate your service to our community. Have a good day.
Thank you. Frank Armendariz.
Oh, that's really good, Commissioner.
And then Nick Cady is following.
Excuse me, sirs, I'm suffering a little bit from the tree pollen in the air. I wish you guys could do something about that as a board. My name is Frank Armendariz. I live in the Cal Young neighborhood of Eugene, and I've been a Lane County resident since 1980. Since about 1984, I've run a small business. I'm a river guide and outfitter. I entertain about 3,000 customers every season. About 2,000 of them come from out of the county, come here to Lane County, spend their money, mostly to go fishing with me and to go whitewater rafting on the McKenzie River in Commissioner Williams' district. A lot of fishermen and rafters in your district, sir, so to remind you of that. I have a couple of hats on this morning, just my business hat, but I'm also a member of the Association of Northwest Steelheaders, member of the local chapter and the board, been a past president and a member since about 1986. Our organization was party to the 2010 FEMA decision agreement, and we welcomed the 2016 implementation or the rollout of the regulations and the proposed regulations. I wanted to remind you who we are as an organization. We're locally, we're about 150 members, but our membership really kind of dwindles as compared to the number of volunteer hours that we put in on Lane County streams and in Lane County resources that benefit fisheries and people that come to this county to utilize those resources. Just a couple of weeks ago, we spent about 100 hours of volunteer time picking up trash along one of the rivers in your county here. And then that's what we do as an organization. Across the state, we're about, we spend about 20,000 hours of volunteer time working on streams and enhancing fisheries and ensuring the public's right to access those fisheries and that those fisheries are quality. We strongly encourage you to just not partake in this lawsuit. We don't want you to be, we don't want to be at odds with you. I just remind you that we have been party to a number of litigations on the McKenzie River in order to protect our membership and the public's right to access quality fisheries. And I'm not suggesting that that's anywhere in the works here, but please don't create a winners and losers scenario amongst people who are really supportive of a lot of things that you do here. We just ask you to maintain your neutrality on this issue and allow these regulations to roll out and see how they work out. And we thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. So we have Nick Cady, and then I had Wayne Martin. Heather, did you want to speak during Wayne's? Okay.
Commissioners, my name is Nick Cady. I'm the legal director of Cascadia Wildlands, and I reside here in Lane County in Eugene. Cascadia has not been involved in this ongoing litigation, but we have been following the issue. We work closely with Portland Audubon, and I wanted to impress upon the Commission the futility of joining this litigation and urge you not to waste county money here. Putting aside positions on Endangered Species Act, federal subsidies, or floodplain development, Audubon launched this lawsuit over 5 years ago. Lane County, by joining this legal campaign, is committing itself to a minimum of 5 years of litigation. Even if with this litigation you manage to sue and then settle with the Trump administration, that settlement can be challenged and will be challenged in court, and that will be dragged into the next presidential administration. I think our county's money and time is better spent sitting down and working through the NIMS FEMA process. I reviewed the settlement and biological opinion this morning, and there are tons of exceptions and off-ramps in that agreement and ways for developers to work through that process. There are no hard and fast substantive restrictions that exist. Cascadia has over 10,000 members, and a good percentage of those members reside here in Lane County. We oppose, in general, our tax dollars facilitating floodplain development. But again, from a purely legal time resources standpoint, this is a waste of money on a national level policy battle that will continue with or without Lane County's involvement. Lane County money does not need to be dumped into this process, and our efforts are better spent figuring out and navigating this settlement agreement so that any anticipated and important projects can move forward. I worry that if we dump money into this litigation, we're going to wind up in the same spot 5 years down the road with just a bunch of money spent on attorneys. Cascadia and our members urge you not to join this litigation. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you. So we have Heather Selecki, followed by Kevin Matthews.
My name is Heather Selicki. I'm in Pete Sorensen's ward. I moved to Eugene in 2008 with a 13-month-old daughter, and I've been kind of a traditional stay-at-home mom, which means also volunteering in the schools, the neighborhood association, a wide variety of boards and associations. And through that work, I've become aware of the housing crisis and the emergency shelter crisis, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I'm also a community emergency response team member, and one of the things that we think about is what's the greatest good for the greatest number when you're approaching an emergency. And I'm wearing this winter coat here today to remind you that we're less than 6 months away from our first freeze, and we need to start thinking about how we're going to handle our crisis with shelter and housing. I also represent 1,300 people who have provided you with a petition asking for emergency shelter. And I know you guys care about this issue. If you had the money, we'd have one. But what can we do now? And there actually are some things you can do in Lane County. Rest stops have gone from a pilot stage to now they're being deployed, even in my own backyard. I'll tell you why I like them, because I've lived in a neighborhood that has car camping and rest stops. I like them because there's a support structure for the residents, and there's on-site management, and it feels more kind of neighborhood friendly. I really like some of the ideas that have been coming out of the rest stops too, as far as ways to support them that are pretty hopeful, such as having some wraparound services. I've met with the Northwest Youth Corps, and they've thought, well, how could that work with maybe a park stewards program? What about a host program at Heilman Boat Landing? What about working with Looking Glass and Hosea to have some youth rest stops? And there's all different things we could do if they were more available. Also the Dusk to Dawn, giving people a sanctioned place to sleep in winter months. Currently, this is not something that's available in Eugene Springfield, but if you co-adopt the Eugene Municipal Code section 4.816 permitting overnight sleeping in the form of car camping, rest stops, and Dusk to Dawn, and co-adopt Springfield's Code 8.012 approval process for outdoor overnight shelter for county land, this would go a long way if you could put this within the UGB to allowing service providers and community organizations to really develop these robust solutions that will help. I mean, like I said, 1,300 people signed the petition asking for shelter in Lane County. That's roughly one for each unsheltered person that we're going to have when the freezes start. And the third thing I'm going to ask you for today is to please identify what public land is currently available within the UGB that is controlled by Lane County that can be deployed in this way. Using public land for public good will help us save money and save lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Matthews, followed by Emily Semple.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for hearing us today. I'm Kevin Matthews. Patty and I raise Occotekee horses at Swan Farm in Dexter. Close to 20 acres of Swan Farm is within the 100-year floodplain of the Middle Fork Willamette, coexisting with the Oregon chub, which our region is proud to have seen recently come off the endangered species list. It's an example of how prudent environmental stewardship and economic use can coexist. Now, the National Flood Insurance Program, which is what's the nexus of the FEMA lawsuit against FEMA regulations that you're considering signing on to, stems from some historical need. Farms, much like ours, that were somewhat unpredictably hit by floods, and in order to maintain those important uses at a time of a lot less development, a lot less industrial impact on our landscape, the federal government developed a program to protect those people. Over the generations, the flood insurance program has turned into, to a large extent, a perverse subsidy. That's a technical term for when government gives people money to do things that don't make sense. When the taxpayers' dollars subsidize people to do irresponsible things they wouldn't necessarily do otherwise. The proposed regulations are not going to have an impact on people who are already in floodplains. They are going to make it a little bit more challenging and put a little bit more sense and responsibility on putting new stuff where we know it will flood someday. Regular middle-class families can't get subsidized government insurance to protect against the risk of cancer. The home builders want to continue to get government-subsidized insurance to protect against the inevitability of floods in 100-year floodplains. Your own staff report, to connect to your earlier part of today's meeting, your own staff report comments the public health effects of these regulations, if they come into effect, will include cleaner drinking water with a benefit to community health and reduced risk from flood damage, from flood loss of life even to your citizens. Don't waste taxpayers' money helping private industry continue an unnecessary perverse subsidy. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Emily Semple. Come on. Followed by, it looks like, Mary Anahash. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. So Emily, please.
Thank you for this opportunity to address you. Emily Semple, Ward 1, Eugene, Pete Sorensen's district. I've been reading all these papers that you've been dealing with, not completely because of the commotion in my own ward. I urge you to not join this lawsuit brought by the misleading group, Oregons for Floodplain Protection. Let's add, for development by destroying critical habitat. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency concluded, quote, Federal Emergency Management Agency must change implementation of National Flood Insurance Program in Oregon to better protect imperiled salmon, steelhead, and southern resident whales. Real protection of floodplains will improve riparian ecosystems, which will improve water quality and actually reduce life safety risks during a 100-year flood. The essential fact of this change to flood insurance is to save essential species. 15 species of fish are protected by the Endangered Species Act. They are already in trouble. Let's not make it worse. We need healthy and functional habitat. I'm the liaison for the Mackenzie Watershed Council, and at the last meeting they reported that fish counts are already drastically reduced. One river which had thousands of fish was now counted at 700. These are fish coming back to reproduce. Another river which had less thousands, but still thousands in the past, has been reduced to 0. We need our fish. They provide calories, protective nutrition. I read all the time about how they'll help with brain health, joint protection. They provide recreation, fishing, as well as protecting our watersheds. Where's my other paper? The intention of this embarrassing and detrimental lawsuit is to promote increasing development while allowing destruction of our sensitive and vital habitat. But the National Flood Insurance Plan reduces habitat. The NOAA has produced reasonable and prudent alternatives which allow development and redevelopment outside of sensitive floodplains. Development and redevelopment of existing structures or planned building is protected. Lane County, in particular, Eugene, is well known for supporting wildlife and protecting habitat.
Thank you, Councilor Semple. Your time's up.
Please don't kill our fish.
So Mary, and it looks like Anna Hash, followed by Charlie Larson. My apologies for murdering your last name.
No worries. Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Mary Ann Nash with the Oregon Farm Bureau. I have terrible handwriting, so I apologize. I'm here today also to talk to you about the FEMA lawsuit. I want to start out by saying that Oregon's farmers and ranchers, and especially those within Lane County, have a strong conservation ethos. We've invested millions of dollars along our properties in stream bank restoration and projects to improve salmonid habitat. So we didn't take entering into the lawsuit and joining the coalition around the FEMA lawsuit lightly. It's not something that we're doing because we want to see development of farmlands. And in fact, Oregon Farm Bureau was one of the primary champions of Oregon's land use planning system and also of Senate Bill 1010 that regulates ag water quality on agricultural lands. And those are two of the laws that are the reasons that we joined the lawsuit. This BIOP was written without any regard for Oregon's strong land use protections, without any regard for Oregon's water quality programs or any other federal or state programs that are already in place to regulate impacts of development in and around floodplains. The BIOP was written in a way that is very confusing for farmers and ranchers about how it would impact its properties. I believe you just heard from a gentleman who's convinced it won't impact his property or existing development on his property. We've done quite a bit of legal analysis, and we don't believe that that's true. One of the big concerns that we have in the South Valley is that you've seen a lot of new hazelnut trees planted. It's a big industry in Oregon. We're going to need new washing and drying facilities on farm to enable our farmers to get their goods to market and stay competitive in a global marketplace. We're really concerned that the mitigation provisions in the BIOP could make these installing new facilities cost prohibitive and in fact potentially bar them altogether in areas where they are needed. These are not projects that will have big impacts on floodplains, and they can be structured under existing law in a way that is going to mitigate any impacts that they have. So we are concerned about the kind of overriding requirements of the BIOP and forcing the county to be in that position of analyzing how this might fit in with their existing laws, how it fits in with other overlays, and looking at things that, quite frankly, in Oregon are regulated by other state agencies and within the purview of other state agencies. And yeah, so I think for us, the big point we want to make is this BIOP has very stringent requirements. As Mr. Cady said, he thinks there's a number of off-ramps. I've reviewed it extensively. I'm surprised he was able to review it in a morning, considering hundreds of pages that it has. I've reviewed it extensively, talked to attorneys about it. There are not off-ramps. There are very stringent requirements that people have to meet with no provisions for Oregon's land use planning laws, Oregon's water quality laws, and any other myriad of state or federal laws that already regulate many of these issues. And those requirements do not match perfectly, and in fact do not match in a way that would even enable landowners to begin to understand how they should fit together, let alone counties understand how they're supposed to fit together when enacting ordinances. So for us, I think the bottom line for our engagement in the lawsuit is we think there could be significant impacts on agriculture and in keeping agricultural land in production and keeping our farmers competitive on a global marketplace. And we need clarity. We need this to fit in together with Oregon's land use laws that we are a huge champion of, with Oregon's water quality program that we're a big champion of, with Oregon's removal fill program that we interact with extensively. We need them to fit together. Right now they don't. And we view the lawsuit as the way to get that clarity and make sure that, that NIMS actually does account for Oregon's existing protections and Oregon's strong environmental ethos when crafting a strategy for protecting floodplains in Oregon, because they didn't do it. If you read the BIOP, there's no provision for Oregon's laws. So that'll conclude because I heard my buzzer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So we have a 10 a.m. time certain. I'm going to take the last speaker signed up, and then we'll move to our time certain. Charlie Larson.
Good morning. My name is Charlie Larson. I've been a resident of Lane County since 1950. And I empathize with your struggle to deal with all the information and all of the different points of view that come at you. I guess my biggest concern is, what does the county do as far as representing the people and the needs of the community that are long-term, particularly the children and the children of the future that need to feel like the county does care about the fish, does care about the environment. And I'd ask you to look at that decision that you're making, whether it really represents the best will of the people for the future. If the county is supporting development and more development and really not paying attention to nature and what she needs. So I would encourage you not to support a lawsuit that's in the face of all that. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes who I have signed up for public comment. We'll get back to Commissioner's response and other agenda items, but we want to move on to item 6A, which is Order 1705-0202 in the matter of approving the Lane County Parks Large Event Assessment Criteria and provide the Parks Advisory Committee latitude and direction in implementing Appendix G of the Large Events Task Force recommendations establishing a large event oversight group. And we have Mike Russell, our Park and Animal Services Manager, Wayne Lemler, our Parks Advisory Committee Chair, and Pat Hoover, our former Parks Advisory Committee Chair, and John Hemler, who was the Large Events Task Force Chair.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. And I get set up here. Chair, Board of Commissioners, Mike Russell, Lane County Parks and Animal Services Division Manager. As he stated, I'm joined by Wayne Lemler, current Chair of the Parks Advisory Committee, Pat Hoover, former Chair of the Parks Advisory Committee and instrumental in helping us through the large events assessment process, and then John Helmer, the Chair of your temporary task force regarding large events. We're also joined in the crowd today by Mary Brorby, who's also a member of the current Parks Advisory Committee. So what we wanted to talk to you today, the Parks Advisory Committee has been working to implement recommendations that you adopted in November of 2015 regarding large events in Lane County parks. Part of that is they formed a subcommittee to deal with specifically developing an assessment tool for large events. So as a promoter or event organizer submits an application to Lane County Parks, there's a assessment process that takes place. And so having an assessment tool to basically score applications and determine whether or not they're compatible with parks values or not. The second thing that they're working on is forming the Large Events Oversight Group, which is a subcommittee, will be a subcommittee of the Parks Advisory Committee that will review the applications, provide the scores, provide feedback to parks staff and the Parks Advisory Committee, and make recommendations on whether or not to approve those applications. So that's what we wanted to talk to you about this morning. The Parks Advisory Committee, as I said, formed a subcommittee to help implement the recommendations of the Large Events Task Force. They've developed a set of criteria that's in your packet, but I'm just going to go over them quickly. There are 24 criteria that they developed. The first 7 criteria are called critical and have trigger scores. So if they score a certain trigger amount, that doesn't matter whatever total score the application might have. These are red flags that say, you know, you have an issue here that you need to resolve, or you cannot proceed. So basically, these first 7 are critical to get a passing score on. So those 7 are effects on the area residents and neighbors, and a score of 2 or an indication of moderate effect on the neighborhood would be a trigger. And park recovery time, so that speaks to an event comes in, uses a facility, and is there any time for the park regarding cleanup or regarding restoring back to the way it was. The amount of score of 1, which is 1 to 4 weeks required to get the park recovered, is a trigger. The third criteria, amplified sound, a score of 2 or 40% of the time between 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. will trigger that criteria. The need for park maintenance during an event, a score of 0 that indicates it requires multiple days to return a park back to public use, is a trigger. The fifth criteria, anticipated cumulative attendance. So a score of 0 or 6,000 or more attendees, and that's cumulative over the length of the event. So if it's a multiple day event and they're expecting 500 people per day, it's a 1,500 person event. So that's how that works. So anything over 6,000 would be a trigger. Police services, the need for either contracting with the sheriff's office or requiring a patrol through the event. A score of 0 indicating a significant amount required. That's either a number of officers or number of patrols that are needed. And the 7th trigger or critical criteria is pre-event hardscaping and site modifications. There's need to actually modify the site, and a score of 2 indicating a moderate need to modify the site. That's a trigger. The rest of the criteria are just score-based. They don't have triggers associated with them, but they are scored. And that's road availability to the park, and looking at capacity. So if it's a large event and there's going to be a lot of traffic, are the roads able to handle that traffic? parking? Is there on-site parking, or is there a need for off-site parking, or accommodation on-site that typically isn't used for parking? Is there mass transportation available? Is there a transportation plan so that bus service or shuttles are provided? The day of the week and time. If it's a weekend or a high use period, it will score lower than if it's not. And then late night versus middle of the day. Disruption of current seasonal or normal park activities. So this gets to the displacement of normal park use within the park. Is it an exclusive use where we actually close off a part of the park to the public for this event? Or is it open and anybody's allowed to come? Cost to participants. Is there a cost to participate? And if so, can anybody participate, or is it reserved for a specific organization? And are there cultural or educational components to the event that get you a higher score? Are there health and fitness components to the event that also gives you a higher score? Environmental enhancement. Are you incorporating some type of enhancement to either the site or other investment? Required sanitation facilities. Is there an impact or is there a sanitation plan that you've submitted that indicates the level of sanitation and that you're meeting that requirement? Geographical impact, dealing with it's kind of a holistic approach to the park location, the neighborhood, and all of that. Fire services, are those needed? This includes fire and ambulance. Food and beverage vendors, alcoholic versus non-alcoholic beverages served. Parks Division revenue enhancement, there is a consideration for whether the event is revenue neutral or if there's a net revenue that is provided by the event to the Parks Division. Negative effect on area businesses and how that impacts the businesses, or if it's a betterment for the businesses. Is there a component of charitable fundraising associated with the event? And then finally, number of years the event has been approved. This is a nod to previous events that have been approved for many years that are continuing to occur in the parks. We wanted to, the subcommittee wanted to acknowledge those.
Mushroom Festival.
So what does that look like? There's a total score of 108, is 108 points possible. The subcommittee is recommending that a minimum score of 65 be applied. So anything below 65 would be referred back to the event organizer, and we'd either work with them or deny the event. Work with them to reapply or deny the event. Anything above 65 is in the green and would be allowed. Of course, depending on those critical factors, those triggers, right? So going back to those first 7 criteria, we would work with the event organizer to address those concerns right away. Also in your packet is the application, which goes into a little more detail. So we have the criteria, but we wanted those who are considering to apply to understand what we were looking for. So the application provides a little more narrative, a little more idea of what would be required. And the idea that staff would have is we'd have a pre-application meeting with anybody that was interested to kind of go through that and make sure we're all on the same page moving forward and that the expectations are clear. The other thing we want to speak to the board about this morning is flexibility in interpreting and implementing Appendix G to the Large Events Task Force report. That was specifically around forming of the Large Events Oversight Group, this subcommittee of the Parks Advisory Committee. So what we're seeing is that Appendix G outlined the membership of the group. For any particular park, it's a group of about 15. So all of the Parks Advisory Committee, event expertise, economic impact, environmental impact, and at-large parks pass holder, say that 20 times fast, neighborhood impact, and nonprofit organization or volunteer stewardship group representation. It's a total of 15 for any given park. Because there's a need to identify neighborhood representatives for each park, and then volunteer or stewardship or nonprofit organizations associated with each park, the total pool of identified members is 40. And this is kind of how that breaks out. So the event expertise, economic impact, environmental impact, and at-large parks pass holder can serve for any park identified. And you'll see 9 parks here identified. The one missing is Cinderella. We're currently discussing with the city of Cresswell to transfer that to them. And so I didn't include that here because we don't intend to have large events there in the future. So there's 9 parks identified as potentially being able to hold large events. And then we have the 2 nonprofit or volunteers and the neighbors represented for each park. So that's where you get your 40, a pool of 40 people that have to be identified depending on which park is being considered for the application. The PAC is requesting that the board provide flexibility in filling the necessary slots of membership to ease the need to identify these 40 participants, but still meet the intent and the spirit of the Large Events Task Force recommendation to have an open and transparent process related to large events being held in Lane County parks that incorporates and allows for public input. The proposal also indicates that the membership of the oversight group will be approved by the Board of Commissioners. That's also in Appendix G. The PAC is requesting that they be given the ability to select membership and proceed with the first meeting of the group as soon as possible. What we don't want to have happen is every time the membership, somebody drops off of that list of 40, we don't have to come back to the board and appoint people to the committee. We would like to ask your permission to go ahead and manage that with the PAC and staff. And the PAC also requests flexibility in determining term lengths for the members to give the PAC the ability to address the initial committee formation and appropriately stagger terms so that terms do not expire all at once. And there also may be a need to bring in expertise on an ad hoc basis, and the PAC wants the ability to bring expertise in addition to the base oversight group as needed. So that's my presentation. I want to give each of our guests an opportunity to weigh in on this, and of course we're here to answer questions that you may have. So we'll start with Wayne, and we'll just go down the line.
Thank you, Mike. Commissioners, what I'd like to say about in reference to the assessment tool specifically was that we met, the subgroup met many times, became a lengthier process than we were expecting, but we took it seriously and we developed it to the best of our abilities. And I'd like to address the minimum score of 65, how we came up with that, because always anyone can look at it and say, well, why didn't you choose 80? Why didn't you choose 40? What we did was we looked at the events that were the problematic ones in the past, and we all know which ones they were. And we ran those events academically through the assessment tool once we had it developed. And we wanted to make sure that each of those events that was problematic would not have passed the tool. And then we threw in a couple extra points to be a little more conservative on the issue to make sure we were being as fair and equitable as we could. So that's where that number of 65 came from. It was an attempt to address past issues with other events that had been problematic because we thought, hey, that's why we're all here. We've had a problem. We need to address it. So that's where we started with that. The other part that I'd like to mention is with the subgroup that's going to use the assessment tool that Mike was just speaking, the 40 folks. All of those people are going to be volunteers, just like I am and everyone else on the PAC. So this whole process is going to be very heavily weighted with public and citizen input. So, do you have any questions for me specifically?
Go ahead.
None. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. In my past work on this and also on the large event task force, I just wanted to mention that this whole Appendix G evolved because in the very beginning, June of 2014, which is almost 3 years ago now, when the LETF started their meetings, it became very clear within the first 2 or 3 meetings that parks had been operating with no checks and balances on their selection of events and no oversight. And that puts a lot of pressure on one person. In this case, it was 2 people who were selecting events. And so Schedule G is really evolved out of 16 months of LETF meetings, and the fact that all 14 of those wonderfully engaged task force members saw that we needed some way to have some checks and balances and spread the responsibility of choosing events beyond just 2 people inside of parks. So I was very proud to have been working on this Schedule G and putting together the assessment tool. The assessment tool has all the precepts in it that are in the full LETF report. Everything that has come up that they worked on that was of concern, that was mentioned, you know, traffic and noise and all the features of what went wrong when we needed to put all this together. Those are addressed really in the Schedule G and the assessment tool. It was so well received, and the parks manager was very pleased. It took us about 6 months to get this, with subcommittee meetings, to get this tool put together. If in your packet it refers to the fact it came out of a city assessment tool in North Carolina, and so we had to convert it to fit a park setting in a county instead of a city. But we got this all put together, and then in September of last year and October of last year, in the PAC meetings, as we brought the final assessment tool forward for a vote, our parks manager was very pleased with that and actually said, I like this assessment tool. We'll use this on all events. It doesn't have to be a 1,000 or a more large event. This will be appropriate for all our events. So I'm very pleased that this is coming together the way it is, and that we're spreading out the responsibility of choosing events for our parks to stakeholders, citizen park users, and the PAC and administration within the parks. I think this is a win-win for everyone.
John?
Well, good morning, Commissioners. It's been a while since I've been before you. Good to see you all. I can't miss this opportunity to welcome Commissioner Williams and also, congratulate you, but also thank you for serving. I know it's a big job, big area, a lot of people to work with. I was the chair of the Large Events Task Force, as many of you will recall. I think it's important to just set this in the context and remember that this activity came from what I think of as sort of a troubled time. In which communication and trust was perhaps at a low. And the commission put together this task force, 14 people. We ended up meeting for 20 meetings. We had subgroup meetings. I mean, it was quite an effort and really very rewarding too. And fear not, I'm not going to go through all the details, but it was a lot of work. Very successful group, culminated in the unanimous adoption of the report by the county commissioners. To the point of this oversight group, I think a lot of us felt that it's great to come up with principles and assessment documents and that sort of thing, but at the end of the day, you need solid human judgment on these things, and issues are going to come up that you don't expect, and so really the importance of an oversight group came. As you look at that appendix, you'll see it's pretty darn detailed for a report like that. It's really true to its time. This was a time when people wanted every question answered. And so Pat and Mike and I got together and tried to think of all those questions and really balance openness against sort of bureaucratic process, not something that's too heavily loaded, but also allowed lots of people to weigh in. So the three of us came up with that Appendix G. So my primary purpose in coming here is, as from my perspective as the chair of the task force, is to support this idea of flexibility. We gave it our best shot at the time, and the reality of implementing something like this requires a little flexibility. And I think so long as we stay true to trust and openness, that flexibility is a good idea. So I'm supporting that aspect of it. And then I just wanted to end my comments by mentioning, having started really paying attention during a troubled time, I have to say how very impressed I am when I see what's going on now with parks and with the master planning process. I went to one of the recent master planning sessions, and it's just like night and day in terms of the degree of input and engagement and professionalism, and it's really really heartening to see how well PAC is working and how this process is going forward. And I think, it's a good opportunity, and we really should thank Pat and Wayne for their leadership on PAC, and also Mike, who's been through this journey. And probably, in my opinion, more than anybody else, some of the county staff, I think Steve Mokrahysky, Tim Elsey have played a huge role in turning this around. So I think things are very good now, and I really appreciate what I've seen. So with that, I'll stop.
So kind of next steps, depending on your action today, we will move forward. We do have and have had requests from event organizers, so there is interest out there. We've kind of begged them off until this process and adoption of the assessment tool and then forming of the oversight group, then we will begin evaluating and receiving applications for events in Lane County parks. With that, that's our presentation. We're open for your questions, any that you might have.
Questions for staff? Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, I want to say thank you very much for the work that you put into this, and I do very much appreciate this. I think your service here, especially to those of you on the committee and on the PAC and the stakeholder group, you're to be commended by putting in a lot of time on this. With that being said, I'm going to blast something here, if you don't, and I don't want anybody's. This is going to be coming from me, my opinion. But I think I have an opinion that may have a little bit of something in backing up with it, because of the fact, while I've not been a hands-on, but I will say as a previous board member of Double T Promotions and involved in the event business off and on for many years, it's the process piece. And I do have an issue with item 2, step 2. I do have an issue with this. In fact, I'd like to maybe get Mr. Dingle up here as well, and just to get his legal opinion on this, because if you're an event I don't have an issue with the criteria. I'm glad that you put the criteria in place. In fact, that is absolutely key, because the one thing you want when you put an event, you have an event, you're coming forward with it, is that the one thing you want is when you're applying here at Lane County, you want to have criteria. You want to know exactly what it is that you're going to be responsible for. But in my view, that the person you need to be talking to is staffs, the professional staff. So step 1, I have no issue with that. I think considering the application, and in fact, in my opinion, the final determinant should be done by the parks manager. That's who should probably be a yay or nay on this. The step 2 piece, I'm trying to figure this one out. Why would the PAC and stakeholder group consider the applications as well? And here's what I'd like Mr. Dingle maybe to comment on. Don't you vote? Aren't you voting members? Isn't the PAC voting members? Okay. This is not quasi-judicial, is that correct?
No.
So this could be, you could have a PAC member who maybe just has a negative opinion of an event coming, and they're going to be part of the process, considering the application process. I think you need to be extremely careful with that. And now I will say, is there an opportunity? Let's say it comes through and the scoring is 62, and the event. The organization putting together the event wants to say, wait a minute, we've gone through this process, we've talked to the manager, can we appeal that? Now, the appeal coming back to the elected PAC, I think is appropriate, because that's exactly what happens with the Planning Commission, that's what happens at times with the City Council, or even the Lane County Board of Commissioners. We have appeals that come, now we can either hear them or not, and more times than not, we elect not to hear a hearings official, which in effect, Mike, that's what you'd almost be, is in a way, is a hearings official. So I got to tell you, just by having this additional step of the process, I'm not sure that I would agree with that. But I would agree with the fact that it would make all the sense in the world that if the applicant were to come and they didn't like the 62 score, they want to appeal it and then bring it forth and go through that criteria and why. And then you can have the final vote and say that we're just gonna stand with the park manager and that decision, or whatever the case may be. I think that's very appropriate. So, Mr. Dingell, I know you just had a first blush on this. I don't know where your feeling is. But I will say this: city councils are also a volunteer elected positions. Planning commissions are volunteer appointed positions. These are appointed positions. They will vote. And so I think having that extra step, and where you may have that issue where someone would come in and say, you know, I'm not sure I like this person or like this organization, and it's not quasi-judicial, I think then someone can almost say, wait a minute, I heard, based on comments I heard at the water cooler, they don't like this, and they voted no on this, then this extra step, and all of a sudden, then it becomes a legal issue. So I just maybe Mr. Dingell's comment on that, and then maybe on this, because if, and I really want to hear from the PAC members as well on why they think this is appropriate, and make your case. So I'm going to ask you to make your case to me, but I want to hear Mr. Dingell first, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, recognizing that I'm pretty much jumping in.
I know you are, and I apologize.
But if I'm trying, and I'm reading step 2, and so maybe I can get some clarity here. If they don't reach the necessary majority, is it intended that ends the process?
Well, and that's the thing. See, I'm reading this, and they have to reach a majority of vote of 2/3 quorum of combined PAC and stakeholder group. But remember, this is a body that votes. So they actually vote on items that then are recommended to the Board of Commissioners, and that's my concern, because I'm looking at this as the same as what a planning commission would do.
Right. Well, that's what I'm trying to understand the effect. So if the effect is, or intended effect is, that if, I understand clearly it says that if 2/3 of a majority is reached, then it does get forwarded to the board for approval. What I'm not so clear on is what happens if they don't achieve the 2/3 majority. Is it intended that it just dies there and the person doesn't have an appeal? Because then I think I understand what you're concerned.
That's the issue I have. Right, and you just nailed it. That's probably the most significant issue I have, is that, so you already have the process of going before Mike. And I'm just using the number 62 because it's right on the cusp of 65. And 64, I'm not going to use that, but 62. There's a tiny little separation there. But they don't have a real true appeal process. But if they went before the PAC, as a planning commission or anything else, you could go through and have that appeals process before it's actually, because frankly on this, there's really no reason for the Board of Commissioners to be involved. It should be the actual PAC and that your role, but you're an elected body. I mean, you're a body that votes, and that's a concern I do have on this piece here. So on step 2. So Mike, and then I want the PAC members to make your case. I want you to make your case, and because I'm not set in stone in this, but this I obviously do have a concern here. So I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lycan, thanks for that. Yeah, there is no identified appeal process. I think one of the things we are trying to do is just get a process going, and we're going to have to probably modify it as we go, depending on how it all plays out. And so we understand that this is our initial process. We're going to see how it works through the process, and if it does become a point where we need to establish an appeals process, I think we need to start thinking about that now and have that understood.
Just remember, the event that's coming here is laying out dollars.
Right.
And so when they're going through this, and they're going through this application process, and they think it's close enough to appeal, and they're ready to lay out dollars, that is significant. And so that's why I bring this up.
So I wanted to say that the way this comes to the board is it's in the form of an event contract. These large events actually execute a contract with us. It's not a special use permit process. It's above that. So when you see it, there's a proposed contract before you, and you're being asked to approve that, and we can talk about that process at that time. The event organizer can be here to discuss that with you and work through that process.
And I would, Commissioner Lycan, I'm not picking or saying that there should be any specific or particular appeal process, but as Mr. Russell just identified, I think it's absolutely critical in terms of fairness that process be identified before there is a less than 2/3 vote in that committee, if that's what the board decides. It's just a perception of fairness. Everyone should know what the rules are beforehand. If it turns out it's an appeal to Mr. Russell or whatever, at least folks know what the outcome of a less than 2/3 vote in that group is.
And you use the correct word there, perception. And perception can be huge on this. So I apologize, Mr. Chair.
Can I speak to this issue? Or? Okay, thank you, Wayne, Chair of the PAC. There are two things I'd like to say about it, Commissioner Lycan. One is, when we set up the flags, or what is now being called the triggers on the specific items, we specifically talked about, okay, if they score low on this item, are we going to banish them and say, no, you can't have the event? And our discussion was, no, we need to sit back with, now whether it's we being the PAC or whether it's Mike Russell, I'm not sure that was specifically defined, but someone would sit back and speak with the event organizer and say, we need to talk about this specific item. How can we get this accommodated so you can have your event? So on those 7 items that have the triggers, we did talk somewhat about how would they appeal that. I'm using the word appeal rather loosely here. The other is, this whole thing was developed out of the LETF's findings and Appendix G specifically for us. And we felt that was to the PAC directing us on how we're going to handle this. And it's been pointed out to me again right here today, the commissioners basically, in my understanding, did approve the LETF findings. And so we're trying to follow those dictates, if I can use that word. And yes, we did not specifically talk about an appeal process that once the PAC or the PAC and stakeholder group combined, if they did vote down a specific event, would there be an appeal process? I think in our minds, if I can just think back about our discussions in the PAC, at least, we did at least vaguely discuss, well, there would be some way that we could continue on if the event provider was able to overcome these specific issues. But we did not define what that process would specifically be.
Any other questions for staff or the committee members?
You want to respond?
Oh, okay.
I could say what the intent of the LETF was, if you'd like, on the issue Commissioner Lycan has raised, but I'm also glad to, in the interest of time, if you want me to.
As chair of that task force, I'd appreciate hearing that.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. I think you've come up with a good question there, and not something that back in November of 15 we thought of. I will say it was definitely the intent that this should not be the kind of process that comes up with some magic number, says the door is closed, go away. The idea of this sort of iteration of going back and saying, okay, here's where it was problematic, what might you change, was definitely the intent of the LETF. And if I have to say, one of my only concerns about a tool is that you not get slavishly too tied to a number. Again, I think you need to use it as a tool, and you need to apply human intelligence to make the judgment. And then finally, the idea was, only reason it goes to county commissioners is, as said, it's a contract. It's not, it's only from that point of view. But I think your point is well taken, and it probably makes sense to spell that out, and that's probably just not something we thought of at the time.
Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tim.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, one of the things that I would like to point out is that Appendix G, and so what you're looking at here as Step 2, has already been approved by the Board of County Commissioners by board order previously. So what the group is asking for today is for some flexibility in implementing Appendix G. So, and we could receive direction from the board that we would want to modify Step 2 as a part of that process.
Thank you. Pat, did you have something you want to share?
I did. This is new. This is brand new. We've never done this before. New things are hard. John and Mike and I put Schedule G together with the idea that it's a skeleton, it's the bones, it's the beginning of something we want implemented into how Parks chooses events going forward. I agree with John when he says flexibility is the main thing. Nowhere have we talked, when we've talked about doing this assessment tool, and we've met for about 7 months on that, nowhere is there anything about appeal or anything legal. This stakeholder group and the PAC are volunteer citizens and park users from Lane County. Their role is to work with park staff. And all along the talk is that if something comes up, if there's a hitch anywhere, we take it to park staff and just say, here's what we're seeing. And I don't think this vote of 2/3 and whose vote counts and how many have to be at the meeting and all that, that was just something we put in as a way to get things started. I see no time that these citizen groups would come to the parks manager and say, we don't like this, we don't want it. It's always been about, let's tell the promoter what it is that they're a little deficient in, see if they can improve it. We want to get events in our parks. So of course we're going to want to work with people, and this tool is just that, it's a tool. And I know legal pieces were ever brought up because we don't foresee that happening.
Commissioner Lykin.
So here's a suggestion I have, and that is this. If we could, and it doesn't have to be built into this, what we're voting on today, what I would suggest in this instead, so with Mike and with Tim here as the Public Works Director, and obviously with Steve as our County Administrator, I think it would make sense because, Pat, you said something I think is key. This is new. And again, I don't want to take away from the work you've done at all. I'm so appreciative. I got to tell you, I think the work you've done here has been outstanding, and I like the criteria you put forth, because I can't say it enough. That will almost simplify what an organization wants to do. They know what the criteria, they know what the expectation is. I think it would make sense that mark it on your calendars, and that is as we go into the summer season. And we're going to start having these events. They're going to go through this process. I think it would make sense to come back in 6 months and just give a report on how this process went, and that if we need to make some little instead of, I don't want to hold this up, and because I want to be very respectful of the work you put into this. You volunteered, and I got to tell you, I'm very appreciative of that. So I think it would make sense for staff to come back along with the members here to come back in 6 months if you wish, if you want to come back in 6 months and just give a report on how things went with this new with the criteria and what we have today, instead of doing tweaks to this, because I think that would make more sense. And if you report and say, you know what, I think we need to make some tweaks to this, then we'll have something in our hands that we will know firsthand what that would be. That's my suggestion.
Commissioner Lyken, I appreciate that you've brought this up. What you just said is what we plan to do. This is to be evaluated as it goes along from season to season. And John and Mike and I said, this is a beginning.
Yeah.
And we do have plans to do this, and we'll be happy to share it with all of you commissioners. But of course, this is just the starting point. But we hope to evolve into something that, you're right, Commissioner Lyken, is easy, plug it in, tell the promoter what they need to do to, be more a better candidate for an event, or it's about helping people get into our parks. It's not about putting up roadblocks. So.
Very good. Thank you.
So any other questions or comments for staff? So I'll just make one quick comment. First, I want to say thank you to everybody that you guys did massive work on this, and I appreciate that, particularly John and Pat and the history with the task force. The one comment I have is there were a lot of parks up there that had no volunteers because there is no organization there. Just Zumwalt and Howard Buford have a volunteer. On those parks that have marinas where we have moorage holders, maybe the possibility of getting a moorage holder to be that person. They have a vested interest in that park. And Richardson, Orchard Point, Perkins, Baker's Bay, they all have moorage holders. And also any of the parks that we're running on Army Corps property, which are almost the same list, maybe have the Corps involved as that interested party on behalf of the land, so to speak. It just might be a suggestion to get some of that beyond to kind of get that party that's interested in just the park and the normal functioning of the park versus the large. Motion on the order. Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move approval of Order 17-05-02-02 in the matter of approving the Lane County Parks Large Event Assessment Criteria and provide the Parks Advisory Committee latitude and direction in implementing Appendix G of the Large Events Task Force recommendations establishing a large event oversight group.
Second.
It's been moved.
Yeah. You beat me. Quick on the draw over here.
Been moved by Commissioner Lyken, seconded by Commissioner Sorensen. Any discussion to the motion? Commissioner Sorensen.
I just want to say thank you to all the volunteers and staff involved in this, particularly the members of the Parks Advisory Committee and the members of the various other organizations, past and present, that have been involved in this. I think that the review that came up in the discussion is a good idea, and I think I would make a recommendation later in the meeting, maybe to have a report back, and maybe Mr. Russell can give us a proposal on what that would be, but I'm just kind of thinking about 6 months from today, a Tuesday, about 6 months from now. And that would be my suggestion for follow-up, and to see how the planning for the next cycle, the next yearly cycle, would go after this cycle. Thanks a lot.
Commissioner Williams, first time I get to say that.
Mr. Chair, thank you for that. I too would like to add my thanks and admiration for your volunteer work. Without volunteers, we would be in a world of hurt as a society. People giving of themselves, giving their time unselfishly, makes this country great. And your endeavors makes this county great. And I really, really do mean from my heart, thank you sincerely for taking the time I know there's many things that you can do besides this, but this is very much appreciated, so thank you.
Any further discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously 4-0 with Commissioner Farr excused. So I am going to take a little bit of liberty as chair and rearrange our order of agenda for a moment. I want to take up item 5B1 while we still have some interested parties in the audience from public comment, and then go immediately into item 7B on legislative committee, because our legislative, our governmental affairs, intergovernmental relations manager needs to get to Salem. So we'll do those in that order, and then we'll jump back to Commissioner's response to public comments and other items. So I'd like to get, we'll begin with item 5B1, which is Order 1705-0201 in the matter of Lane County electing to participate in the coalition challenging the National Flood Insurance Program's Oregon Biological Opinion, and Lane County becoming a member of Oregonians for Floodplain Protection and contributing $500 toward litigation. And we have Council Steve Dingle before us. Any introductory remarks?
Just very briefly, Mr. Bozovich and other members of the board, you'll see that I put together a pretty extensive packet for this in terms of the materials. I believe that it is over 108 pages long. I did not attach the actual BIOP because it's 487 pages long, something like that. Really, the purpose today was to follow up with, I believe, in June of 2016 and August of 2016, the board had a couple of briefings from the Land Management Division talking about the potential impact of the BIOP on the land use planning process in the state of Oregon generally and in Lane County. And then in response to a letter sent by the coalition initially in November of 2016, and then followed up by a more specific letter in March asking the Lane County to join with other counties in this coalition involving the proposed BIOP and the RPAs. We had an executive session, I believe it was, no, it could have been last week. Was it last week?
Yeah, it was last week.
It could be because I was in California. I think it was the week before that we did this one. But in any event, and discussed the request, and then it was brought forward to be discussed at this meeting. And it's my understanding that Commissioner Sorensen asked that it be removed from the consent item. And I do have some and at the appropriate time, I know that Commissioner Sorensen forwarded some questions to me and to the administrator to be answered in relation to this. And at the appropriate time, I'll pass along what I've learned.
Thank you. So maybe it's appropriate just to, Commissioner Sorensen, I think, is in the queue, so we'll go ahead and let him get going, and I think we'll probably get to your questions really quickly.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask questions about this. And I think that maybe the best way to start off is I did send Mr. Dingle a couple of questions. I got more now, but I think maybe a good starting point would be just to hear what you were able to learn about the about this in response to the questions. And then after I sent those questions in, the board released on Thursday or Friday the packet, and that, as Steve mentioned, consists of 108 pages, so the packet itself is rather large, but I do have some questions as a result of the packet being released.
And I was going to say, and I do apologize for the lateness of that. You'll recall I was in California last week, and so it was a little bit difficult to get that all put together. And I think Ms. Jones, as a result of some, and Commissioner Bozovich can speak to this because he was personally present at these. Essentially what happened is there were a series of meetings with the National Marine Fisheries Service talking about the biological opinion and the RPAs, the reasonable prudent alternatives. And there was discussion among not just Lane County, but other counties. And as part of that process, There was discussion, and some of those commissioners asked whether or not they could submit a letter, or whether a letter would be submitted to the counties asking them if they wanted to participate in this challenge to the BIOP and these rules. And I think you've heard the really short version of this is essentially the things that you've heard from folks on both sides of the issue discussed today in terms of what different people believe. The folks who are moving forward with the coalition believe, I think the nutshell summary of it is that the biological opinion is, and sort of the catchphrase is, a one-size-fits-all. They're taking essentially the biological opinion from Washington, placing it on Oregon, which has vastly different land use laws and other rules regarding zoning. And the one thing that I did that has changed a little bit, not since I sent this out, but since this process started, was FEMA themselves have reversed course and issued again, it's about 120 some page opinion indicating that in their opinion there is no, I think the phrase is BE, it's their opinion that there is no biological effect triggering the application of Section 7 of the ESA. The second question was this on the county's work plan or the strategic plan? I don't think this specifically was, but the board did ask for 2 briefings from land management. I presume that had to do with the potential impact on the land management division in a broader, more general term. Actually, it's question number 3. You have it. There's 2 twos here. What other governments besides Lane County are members of the coalition organization? Based on a later answer, I don't know that there are. Others have reached this point and joined. I know that one county that is sort of, I think, taking point, and again, I believe Commissioner Bozovich can speak to this, is Tillamook County because of the nature of their county and where it is. It has a tremendous impact on them. And then the Council for Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, Ms. Lawrence has indicated several others are considering and or have committed to participating. It says if Lane County opts to participate and become members for Oregonians of Floodplain Protection, we'll be able to answer the question. And she says at this point, that information is not publicly available. 3, who controls the organization Lane County is being asked to join? The lawsuit will be filed by a nonprofit. It's a 501c3, the Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, whose membership includes multiple entities. And if you look at the letterhead, the next question is what staff person and what department at Lane County is tasked to work on this? Is there a budget for that? How much staff time is devoted to this? To this point, it has been, like I said, primarily, as I understand it, the majority of the staff time has been put in by the Land Management Division in response to the 2 requests by the board for the discussions on those, the one I mentioned in June and August of last year. And then time by County Council to respond to the letters of November 23rd and scheduled the executive session. And the final part is the budget request is only $500 to join. And then I believe in my discussions with Ms. Lawrence, what there would be after that point would be some staff time involved in declarations. I think she mentioned that as one of the things that she specifically information that she would specifically need. And I believe associated with that might be information from our land management division indicating these are our land use rules surrounding floodplains. And then finally, I believe the last question that at least was sort of pre-submitted is what court is Lane County suing in? Since the litigation has not been initiated, no final decision has been made on this issue. I think that's partially due when you read the 2 letters because of sort of the ask, which is one is a proposed litigation challenge and the other one is a proposed rulemaking challenge. And so obviously those occur in different forums. So those are the 7 questions, 6 or 7 questions that you submitted ahead of time.
Thank you. The additional questions would be along these lines. I attempted to find out what Oregonians for Floodplain Protection was, and I Googled Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, and I Googled Oregonians for Floodplain Protection 541 and Oregonians for Floodplain Protection 503 to kind of see if I could find a phone number or an address, and I can't find any information on this group. Do you know where they're located, who runs it, what their address is?
I know
what I guess I'm getting at is if we're being asked to join an organization, I would like to know what our role would be with that organization besides sending them $500. I'd like to know what they've said in the past about these issues so that I could form some view of whether I want Lane County's name associated with joining this group on the assumption that they are a group of Oregonians. Who are the other Oregonians besides us that are being asked to join this? And specifically, I can't see whether or not the Association of Oregon Counties or the League of Oregon Cities that represent hundreds of governments with identical concerns about the effect of a federal policy and a state policy on a city or a county and their regulation of floodplains. I can't see that any other city or county or association of cities and counties have gone to this extent. And before I want to say, oh, we should join it, I'd like to know more about, because there are a lot of groups that are phony organizations that have phony titles, and I don't know whether this is one or not, but what floodplains have these Oregonians protected in the past? How do they protect them? And, you know, is it really an organization, or is it just a group of the people who themselves gave notice of intent to sue FEMA back in November? So what can you tell me about the group? Now, not the coalition, because the coalition is a group of 6 people, 6 groups, 6 entities, names like Oregon Home Builders Association, Associated Oregon Industries. Those are groups that represent people with a legitimate interest in this issue. They've given notice of intent to sue FEMA. What about this Oregonians for Floodplain Protection?
Well, I think the clearest source or clearest answer to that is, first of all, the point of contact that I've been dealing with is Ms. Lawrence. And if you look at the March 31st, 2017 letter that asks that she addressed to Commissioner Bozevich indicating making the request that Lane County join it, it talks about who the members of it are. Where they're physically located, I do not know. I know that she's the person.
She's a Seattle attorney.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
They may be in her office in Seattle. That may be the legitimate office of Oregonians for Floodplain Insurance, a Seattle law firm.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
We don't know.
But she, in that letter, she indicates who the members are. They're the folks that were part of the earlier coalition, as well as the anticipated membership of other local government entities in doing this. And as far as what does it stand for, I think probably the clearest example, or the clearest, and it's pretty detailed, but is set out in the 2 letters that were authored by Ms. Lawrence on behalf of the coalition, dated November 23rd, 2016, addressed to various federal agencies. And I tried in my board memo to distill down those they're like 30 or 40 pages, the 2 letters, down to
7 pages from 63
well,
to 70.
just trying, yeah. For example, if you look at, and also there's, I attached the board memo from from the Land Management Division. But essentially what it does is it, on the first 4 or 5 pages of my board memo, it in very bullet point fashion sets out what their positions are and challenges are with regard to the buy-up and the RPAs. I put them in two large categories. One is that they're challenging the rulemaking authority, sort of an administrative law challenge, and then the other one is what I would call a more substantive challenge, which is the whole challenge and the notion that the buy-up was flawed in its production in terms of all those things that you heard other people talk about that weren't considered land use laws.
On the Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, it'd be fair to say that we have never received a letter from that organization on any matter pertaining to floodplain protection in Lane County. They've just been assembled for the purpose of doing either the rulemaking challenge or the lawsuit against FEMA.
Oh, I think that's what Ms. Lawrence says in her March 31st, 2017 letter. This is a result. This only, and again, the timing I think can be clarified by Commissioner Bozovich, but it's my understanding that it wasn't until these meetings were had with, I think DCL, I think the state was involved to a certain extent, and the federal government would have these discussions with local governments this past summer, where they talked about how this was going to be rolled out and implemented, that it became where it started to have an actual impact or a potential impact.
Now, the way the board order is written is we're going to join the organization, Oregonians for Floodplain Protection. We're going to be involved in the lawsuit. My question is, if we are required to give a formal notice to FEMA, 60-day notice saying we're going to sue you for making rules that we don't like, and they made, and then the 6 organizations, Associated Oregon Industries, Oregon Home Builders, gave notice in November 23. They gave an extensive notice saying, okay, this is our 60-day notice. We're going to sue you, and we're giving notice of intent to do that. Lane County hasn't done that. Are we going to give a 60-day notice, or are we going to just join the lawsuit that they are filing because they've given the notice? Are we going to get thrown out of court because we haven't given the notice that's required before you sue FEMA?
That's a question probably best directed to Ms. Lawrence. My understanding is, based on my conversations with her, she wouldn't be asking Lane County to join the coalition if they were going to be, if she thought the Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, which is different than the coalition. I'm sorry, I'm conflating those two. I believe that the coalition is a subset of the Oregonians for Floodplain Protection.
Oregonians for Floodplain Protection never gave any notice, neither did Lane County. And my question is, can these organizations bring a lawsuit challenging this federal decision when there's a federal law that says, hey, before you file a lawsuit against a federal agency, we'd like you, we, Congress, we'd like you to give a notice to that agency so that they can correct whatever thing you say they should correct. We've never given that notice.
I don't know I don't know whether or not Oregonians for Floodplain Protection has given a 60-day notice.
Well, they're not listed in the letters that you've provided us.
Correct, but I'm also not representing that this represents all of the correspondence between Ms. Lawrence and the federal government.
Bottom line is, Lane County and, to the best of your knowledge, Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, neither have given a required 60-day notice.
I have not. I know that Lane County has not.
Okay.
As I've said, I can't speak to what the floodplain.
And it's be fair maybe to say, in the 108 pages you gave the board on this important thing, no notice was provided by you, because you didn't have it, you couldn't provide it, of this organization, Oregonians for Floodplain Protection. They've not given that notice, at least in the documentation that you've been able to get for us.
There has been the information I've been provided by Ms. Lawrence and the information that the buy-up and the technical advisories doesn't contain any of that,
Does this board order, if it's approved by the board, does it allow Ms. Lawrence to represent to the court that Lane County is suing FEMA?
Yes.
It does. And yet we haven't given the notice that's required.
Well, again, it's not Lane County. I want to make that clear.
Okay.
You keep saying that. This is not Lane County versus the federal government. It would be Oregonians for Floodplain Protection.
Okay.
Would be suing the federal government.
Okay.
So I want to make that clear. You keep
Okay.
saying that. That's not accurate.
Well, I just want to clarify, are we being asked to be a named plaintiff in this lawsuit?
To the extent
Does our board order allow that?
in terms of like in the caption, I don't believe so. What it is asking is to become a part of the Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, which is anticipated to make rule challenges and or a substantive challenge to the Oregon buyout.
Okay. All right.
So I think that's strictly speaking what it's asking.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the detail here on it, both the status of the group we're being asked to join and the detail on who's given notice and who hasn't given notice of this intent to sue. And I guess at this point, I'll just say I appreciate the work you've done on it. But as you might imagine from the comments that I've been making and the public comment we got today, I just think that if Lane County wants to do this, I guess it's up to the Board of Commissioners to do it, but it seems at a minimum premature before other organizations that are supposed to represent the concerns of Oregon cities and counties, such as LOC and AOC, until they've formed an opinion that this is such an important thing that they ought to be using their association money to get on the side of Associated Oregon Industries and other organizations that have given notice that they intend on suing. Before we get dragged into their fight, it seems to me, and this is my view, that we should be cautious until other organizations, and certainly our board has a big role in the Association of Oregon Counties, the League of Oregon Cities, which is a comparable organization to our association group. Cities in Oregon are also affected by this. So before we, just join a group that I can't even find on the internet, I would just like to urge some caution in going ahead with it, and maybe the way to show that caution is to have Mr. Kyler or other people that are working more closely with AOC to let us know whether or not AOC and LOC are going to be part of a group to join this group and have their names along with the names of individual cities or counties used in this fight. The other part of it is that you would normally think in the political context of a lawsuit against the new administration that there'd be some lobbying efforts by the Associated Oregon Industries and others to try to get the Trump administration to put some pressure on FEMA and on the National Marine Fisheries Service to kind of lighten up on whatever protective regulations they've been issuing, and there might be some behind the scenes thing that might be different than having Lane County be the sole entity that says, oh, well, we know these rules are all bad and we want a court to get rid of them. So I would just urge caution in this, and I guess it's really up to the board as to whether we involve all 5 commissioners and how much time we take on this issue. So.
And I would say, Commissioner Sorensen, one of the letters, the November 23rd letter actually asks the very thing that you did, which is to pull back the rules, to re-engage with local governments and take into account their land use planning and all those different issues before they implement the RPAs.
Thank you. Further questions and comments? So if there's none, I have a few. And my first question is if we choose to approve this order and participate in the nonprofit organization and the suit, does that mean that we are actually against protecting endangered species, or that we're against protecting floodplains participating in that suit?
No, actually, that was one of the questions that in answer to the question posed by Commissioner Sorensen, Ms. Lawrence had agreed no one is trying to stop ESA, Environmental or Endangered Species Act protections. The county and its constituents remain subject to their existing responsibilities under the Endangered Species Act. We're trying to retain the county's self-determination regarding the endangered species protections rather than adopting or accepting National Marine Fisheries Services approach, which takes the one-size-fits-all approach and doesn't take into account the other considerations that, in terms of preservation, that are imposed on the county by the state land use planning process and some of our own local regulations.
So we are currently participating in multiple suits against various entities, from the state to MERS to the federal government through ONC. In those cases, did we have to actually take individual action as Lane County to participate in all those suits, or did we just get dragged along?
No. You have no. Other than being a defendant, you can't get dragged along in litigation.
Right.
Okay. If you're a plaintiff, it requires some affirmative action on your part.
Right.
Now, the closest thing to that was the and that's just the situation with a class action lawsuit, where once the court certifies a class, you are presumptively a member, and it would require affirmative action to opt out. But in all the other instances, the board made a conscious decision to participate.
Yeah, and I think there was a conscious decision to not opt out of the class action. So we have done this before.
Yes, and I would point out that in each one of those other situations, and I'm sure Commissioner Sorensen understands this, one of the difficulties when everybody is on the outside and considering joining litigation, you are not privy to certain kinds of conversations and discussions that go inside until you have agreed to participate. Like, for example, we did in the MERS litigation, where you sign an agreement that says you're one of the parties. Now everyone can be frank and candid because attorney-client is protected, privilege is protected.
Right.
And that's essentially what this 501c3 process is. It's not unlike the group that was formed with the MERS litigation.
Right, and I don't think anyone would object to the fact that we're participating in that litigation against the system that brought us the 2008 housing crisis to some degree, and has created the zombie houses out in the county where we can't track down an actual owner for a house that's unoccupied and becoming an eyesore. So, I did participate in a meeting. There were two other county commissioners there, County Commissioner Tim Josie from Tillamook County and County Commissioner Melissa Cribbins from Coos County with the folks from NIMS before we started looking at this. And one of the reasons why AOC is not involved and why they're asking specific counties and local governments to be involved, and maybe you can answer this question, which has greater chance of gaining standing, an individual government that's impacted in their comprehensive plans, or a association of those governments?
And in my discussions with Ms. Lawrence, that is one of they are trying to find the broad, sort of hence the name coalition, a broad range of people and entities that are directly impacted by the buyout.
Right.
So yes, in terms of who has more direct standing, a local government that says if you do this, it's going to have this impact, or Association of Oregon Counties that would be representing a cross-section, because it impacts different counties different ways.
Yes, it definitely does.
I mean, that's one of the issues with it is Tillamook County is affected one.
And there are counties that have no impact. You can get out to Malheur and Grant, where they don't have Salmonoid watershed or something, and there's no issue there on this particular bill. But in that meeting with the fisheries folks, it became apparent that we are getting the exact same reasonable and prudent alternatives that Washington State got, except for they actually removed some of the flexibility from Washington State's version. So, the discussion of off-ramps is all fine and good, but they're really difficult to get on those off-ramps and easily challengeable. So there's no certainty. And one of the things that we have set up in Oregon that was not recognized and was obvious in our conversations with the folks that wrote the RPA was they did not take into account Senate Bill 100 and our statewide planning goals. And the fact that we have urban growth boundaries and comprehensive plans for every urban growth boundary and what that impact of these new rules are, and they go beyond the floodplain. One of the misconceptions about the reasonable prudent alternatives is they're only protecting floodplain when it actually requires a buffer from a floodway, which can get well beyond a floodplain. For instance, the eWeb property in downtown here that's looking at redevelopment sits on kind of a bluff above the Willamette River. It's actually not in the floodplain down there by the old power station, but there's a 170-foot buffer required from the floodway, which takes in most of the eWeb property. So as we look at that and counting that into any sort of available land study, it gets really difficult. Same thing happens with Glenwood. Same thing happens with Old Town Florence on the Siuslaw River. The same thing happens with parts of Cottage Grove from the Coast Fork. On and on and on, there's issues with the fact that they did not take into account what it's going to do to our needed housing inventories and employable lands inventories, which is going to end up impacting urban growth boundaries and having us to go back and redo just about every master plan for every city and a rural comp plan. And there's a huge local impact to that. And as part of our strategic plan for vibrant communities, this is a real issue for us. And our strategic plan has to be flexible enough to react to new regulations and new input. To me, I think this is about just trying to get recognition of what we're already doing in Oregon. We had Commissioner Josie, who's a former legislator. He actually was there and moved through OWEB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and created our watershed councils. So it's and as a Democrat, so it's not like he's sitting there as some great defender of industry, but the impact on Tillamook County is just going to be devastating if they implement the RPA. We have Commissioner Melissa Cribbins that was in that meeting with me. She's a former eWeb employee. I worked with her. She worked in our water quality lab and up at the treatment plant up in Hayden Bridge. She went back to school, got her law degree, and practiced environmental law before becoming elected a commissioner from Coos County. Also a Democrat, also not very supportive of the RPA because of what it will do to Coos County and their ability to continue to do any sort of comprehensive planning because there's such a limited amount of buildable lands in those counties. One of the reasons the Farm Bureau is so involved in this is because it's going to exploit the urban growth boundaries, which is ultimately going to mean that we're going to be looking at taking EFU lands into urban growth boundaries. And they understand its impact. I don't think I've ever seen a coalition that has both the concrete and aggregate folks and the Farm Bureau in the same side of an issue. Those are two traditionally opposing parties. It must have some great impact to get those two parties to agree that there needs to be a change in the law. So, I brought this forward. And it was a request to Lane County. I think it's important that we participate. Tillamook County is already committed to participating. I understand from Commissioner Josie, Coos County is considering it right now. And I think there's other local jurisdictions that are considering it. And I don't believe we're asking to explode the Endangered Species Act or ask for irresponsible floodplain development. We already have Goal 15 that controls the Willamette Greenway. We already have goals on protecting estuaries and other Goal 5 resources. This is just about recognizing Oregon's land use laws and the work we've already done, the work that watershed councils have done to protect salmonoids wasn't considered. the work that the Mackenzie River Trust has done in taking Waite Ranch on the Siuslaw River and going from a diked off ranch and converting it into 200 acres of tidal wetlands, none of that gets considered. Our work with the Turtle Flats and converting that over to connected wetlands and sanctuary for salmon fry doesn't get counted. It's all about, there's just this concrete set of rules in the RPA, and it's going to really just completely destroy our land use planning in this county and destroy our ability to do comprehensive planning, because the off-ramps are not clear and objective, and needed housing standards need to be clear and objective. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. And just, joining this group will allow us, the group, to provide notice. That's probably one of the first things they'll do is provide their 60-day notice on our behalf and enter that conversation into, can we actually go back and relook at the RPA and balance it against Senate Bill 100, balance it against our watershed protections that we have here, and look further into it. It's not like we're asking to completely remove any protections of the floodplain. I think we just want to recognize the protections we've already established in Oregon and understand that maybe a little bit of impact inside of UGB is far better than expanding UGBs into farmland and having greater impact there. So, if this goes through, we're going to start looking more like Southern California, where we're going to have expansive suburbs versus being able to have concentrated vertical urban growth, centralized urban growth. So I would recommend that we participate in this. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on a statement. I think that that Commissioner Bozovich made, and I think it might be in conflict with what Steve said. So I'll just try to ask it as clearly as I can. One reason for us to join this coalition, as Commissioner mentioned, is that Lane County gives additional standing to the plaintiff's case in challenging these rules. And so, assuming we want to challenge the rules, and we want those rules to be challenged successfully, an association like the Association of Oregon Industries or Oregon Home Builders Association, they don't have the standing to maybe bring this lawsuit, but a local government like Lane County or Tillamook County maybe gives additional standing. And that's one of the articulated reasons for Lane County to join this organization and this effort. But when I ask you, would Lane County be a named party to this case, you, Steve, said you didn't think so, wouldn't be necessary, we wouldn't be, the lawsuit wouldn't be called Lane County versus Trump administration or something. It'd be just Lane County. It wouldn't be Lane County. So I just want to get some clarification on whether or not by joining this organization, we are somehow going to be asked later to be the named party so that we are able to show a specific involvement of a local government that's affected, as opposed to the home builders that want to build homes maybe near floodplains, or maybe other groups that don't agree with the Association of Northwest Steelheaders about the fish and whether or not the floodplains are necessary for the fish, and the fighting that's going on between these sort of warring forces of the fishermen and the floodplain developers.
Okay, well, first question. I do not understand, and I can't imagine a situation where, if the litigation proceeds in the way that it's been suggested, where Lane County would ever show up in the caption. It would always just be Oregonians for floodplain protection. With regard to your second point, and again, I'm not the chief strategist on this, but it's my understanding that the idea of the floodplain group is to provide a wide range of entities that are affected by this. And let me use your example. For example, this board has considered and discussed building low-income housing over by behavioral health. that is in the floodplain. That would be impacted by this biological opinion, right? That would be a governmental entity providing low-income housing. That would be very different, for example, than a private developer building a subdivision somewhere in a similar area. And I think that's why they're looking for a wide range of people, because they're different interests, and they want to show how different. We're clearly building low-income housing is very different from someone building a subdivision. And there might be different impacts, but they're going to both be impacted by it. That's the best answer I can give you at this point.
Okay. Will you come back to the board if we're asked to be a named party?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think that the authority that's being granted here is being granted to join Oregonians for Floodplain Protection, and I believe that would be, I would bring that back to the board if someone was saying you're now going to be the lead plaintiff or you're going to be a named party, when that wasn't what the board anticipated at this point.
Thank you.
Commissioner Leighton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Steve, question I have. So on the different comprehensive plans that Lane County's already co-adopted with other communities, say, for instance, the Glenwood Refinement Plan, that's now been co-adopted. So based on the information we're receiving as the potential from FEMA, what does this do to those plans?
Well, to be very blunt, I don't know. It depends on who you believe or who you listen to, because there seems to be different, and I think Commissioner Bozovich, this was part of he can speak to this a little bit. I think this was part of what was occurring at these meetings, is they were trying to get some sort of assurance and certainty. When is a project, or when is the stated purpose of this is that this will not be used to undo any project or anything that's built. But then the question becomes, what is built? I think they seem to be pretty consistent that they're not going to ask people to tear down their houses. However, there seems to be a question about when you're talking about the planning stage and that comprehensive plan with Glenwood, nothing has been, quote, built. And so there is a concern, and there is essentially an uncertainty that the federal government won't step in at that point in the process and say, well, you've only planned, you really haven't built anything. There's still time for you to go back and apply the RPAs to your planning process. That's an uncertainty. And no one has given a definitive, that I've been able to find, a definitive answer to that question. The only question they've answered definitively is, we will not require people to tear down their homes.
So it makes sense to me that we need to codify this in some way, in some fashion, because I believe the city of Springfield and the Glenwood Refinement Plan, they based their floodplain recommendations, floodplain protections, the recommendations based on the state of Oregon's land use system. And so if something like this were to come into play, I will tell you, but what Commissioner Bozovich was, talking about, it makes me maybe want to get back into the residential home building industry, because all of a sudden, if they start, this will likely tear up the SB 100. We have a whole new land use system. Maybe it's on par with Idaho. And I don't know about you, but boy, I'd sure like to maybe expand that out and get cheap dirt. My guess is you'd probably be able to build houses for much cheaper than what you can today. But hopefully that will not happen. The state of Oregon has the most unique land use system that there is in the United States, period. Conversation over with. No other state has one like us. Washington is somewhat similar, but it's just not that close. Ours is so unique, and the protections that are already built in are so substantial. And that's the part that I'm really concerned about, is that we co-adopted, and I'm just picking on using Glenwood Refinement Plan because that is along the Willamette River. So we co-adopted that plan. And I got to tell you, I'm very concerned by the fact that if all of a sudden what we have before us, if it's not challenged, goes into play, these refinement plans get, and I think you said it perfectly, there's nothing built on them. It's a plan. And the last I checked, plans are living, breathing documents. And that would be the argument. And the argument would be, they're living, breathing documents. I'm sorry. These are the new rules. You're going to have to blow up this plan. And by the way, you're going to have to spend money on staff time again all over go through the process all over again and to be able to adopt just a simple plan that was worked on for years, the Glen River FEMA plan that we co-adopted here in Lane County. That's my concern. If there's anything that needs to be done, that I think the challenge makes sense because then you can finally codify. What does this mean? It can't be a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach. Just can't. And along with all 50 states, that's my piece on this, and I'll leave it at that.
And I would just say this, you're right. I mean, the briefings that you've heard from LMD and the one thing that I think everyone agrees is that this will add, no matter what, another layer of complexity to an already complex area of law, namely land use in Oregon. So, and I will ask those two questions and send those all to the board, the two questions that were posed today by Commissioner Sorensen in terms of the notice by the floodplain group, and I'll find some more information about who the registered agent is and whatnot for the 501c3.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I really appreciate the dialogue that we've just had, different points of view and all that. For me, in the conversation I heard at least twice, maybe three times, the one-size-fits-all reference. I believe that things that are administered from Washington, D.C. Probably have merit to some extent. But when it comes to local control, those locally have the best answers for their community and their surroundings. And so as a local control guy, we have a number of watershed councils and related groups that take a very active and interested part in water quality and all the floodplain issues. But I believe these are issues that should be addressed locally. FEMA's record in some emergency management has not been real great, and so I have that bit of a concern as well. So I appreciate the dialogue. I look to support this.
So do we have a motion on the order?
Just a question.
Commissioner Lichen.
So I have a question. This may be more towards you, Commissioner Bozovich, and that is there a timing issue here? Because does it make sense to have there seems to be some questions where, Mr. Dingell, you said you'd get back to us and get back to, in particular, Commissioner Sorensen. So I'm asking if there's an exact timing issue, or if that's not problematic.
Let me answer that question kind of two ways. One is, I think there is sort of a timing issue. Originally, they wanted to get this going at the end of April, and they're already slipping a little behind. I guess that the answers to the two, it would be if the answers to either one of the two questions posed by Commissioner Sorensen would change your result today. And if it doesn't, then there's really more of an informational thing. I mean, for example, I think with the one with the 501c3, I'm simply going to find out from Ms. Lawrence who the registered agent is and what their address is. I mean, that's okay. I don't know if that's going to change much, and whether or not she's given notice or whether or not notice is required. Again, if that's going to change your opinion, then we certainly set that over. I know she wanted to get it done sooner rather than later.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 17-05-02-01, the matter of Lane County electing to participate in the coalition challenging the National Flood Insurance Program's Oregon Biological Opinion. Lane County becoming a member of Oregonians for Floodplain Protection and contributing $500 toward litigation.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Lichen and seconded by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that I don't agree that the board should be doing this. I think that fundamentally spending the $500 and contributing the staff time to be involved in a lawsuit that's filed in a federal court far away from here is going to be a amount of energy and local resources and money that we spend, which is really we're really a bystander to a fight that's going on between the advocates for Oregon's imperiled rivers and fish and those who have economic interests contrary to the welfare of the fish in the rivers. And there's a lot of fights going on in Washington, D.C. that we could get involved in, but we usually don't get involved in all those fights. Number one, because we don't have the money and the time, and number two, we don't have the staff resources. But in this instance, the board is going ahead with joining a group that I can't find anything about on the internet, at least, and I just think it's, irrespective of whether we should act on this ever, we should at least have more knowledge of what our role is supposed to be and what type of group this is that we're being asked to join. So I'm against the motion. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Lyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just real quickly, I just think it makes sense to at least be a part of a larger organization, at least codify what is happening here with regard to FEMA rules. I think we've heard, in particular by the young lady from the Farm Bureau. That was very articulate, but it also matches up really from my own personal feeling. That is, Oregon has the most unique land use system in the entire United States, and we have so many protections built in that are there for our citizens. Commissioner Williams stated about local control, and I think that's something I've been a strong believer in for many years, but I think we need to codify exactly what this means. And it's no different than the Associated Oregon counties, ONC counties, which Lane County is a part of, suing the federal government over the monument expansion issue in particular because of what that potentially does as far as ONC lands are concerned and the legal battle that's there. And that, by the way, there is absolute law in place that should not allow for certain expansions on the monument status that was put forth by an executive order in the prior administration. So I think it's no different here. I think trying to find out and to codify makes a lot of sense, and that's really where I'm at on this. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? I'll just say that the ONC suit was actually filed in Washington, D.C.'s district court far away, and we're participating in that. And yes, there will be staff time that might be involved in this suit, but it will dwarf in comparison to what the staff time will be required if we start amending all 12 cities' comprehensive plans and our own rural comprehensive plan to address the RPA at this point. And I feel that it's necessary. This is actually cost avoidance. And the one thing that was missed in this whole biological opinion and reasonable and prudent alternative development was local coordination, which should have been required under the ESA and was not. We're going to discuss later participating in coordinating with a federal agency on the Holt Pond examination later on today a little bit. We do that regularly. That was a step that was not done in this process. And that was one of the things that also became clear in talking with the fisheries folks. So therefore, I'm going to support this motion, and hopefully we can, hopefully just the knowledge that there are local governments that are participating in the coalition will bring the parties to the table, and we can get that local coordination and a better set of rules that addresses Oregon's unique land use system. Any other discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. I mean, no. Sorry.
All those against?
No.
And Commissioner Farr is excused.
Having voted yes and no, I would like to change my vote to no.
Motion passes 3-1 with Commissioner Sorensen in dissent and Commissioner Farr is excused. So we're going to jump down to item 7B, and our legislative intergovernmental relations manager, I keep getting that wrong, has been patiently waiting. I know he's going to probably maybe break some state laws trying to get to Salem, but hopefully we can get through this and get him up the road. And hopefully we won't go too far into lunch, and we may have to move a lot of the other board items till after executive session. Sorry about that, Mike. Can't move? Okay. We may have to stay into lunch, folks. So go ahead, Alex.
Okay, I'll try to be quick, Mr. Chair. Chair Bozovich and members of the commission, I'm Alex Kyler, your Intergovernmental Relations Manager. I am here with several items from the Legislative Committee meeting, which was held on April 27th in this building. You've got a memo before you as part of your board packet, and there were 3 items that we addressed at the Legislative Committee that I'd like to go over with you. There's a suite of bills that the Legislative Committee made recommendations on. There is a letter that we discussed, correspondence to the Oregon Health Authority that we discussed, and then I'd like to at least briefly update you on what we're referring to as the transportation package. It's a fairly large effort in Salem to create new revenue for transportation infrastructure projects statewide. So if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair, I'll just go in that order. So the packet doesn't say a whole lot about the bills we reviewed. You'll need to look at attachment A for those measures. And I wanted to bring to your attention on attachment A, items number 1 and 2, which are Senate Bill 202 and Senate Bill 840, were assigned to the Legislative Committee as a board assignment by then Commissioner Stewart at the beginning of session. There was quite a bit of email traffic that I think he was party to that suggested that these bills were worth watching. These bills have to do with how cities regulate their rights of way. And while really we haven't experienced this dynamic, there was a situation up in Clackamas County where cities were attempting to essentially assess fees on the county for use of the right-of-way, and that led to some consternation up there. So this suite of bills came forward. Cities came out hugely opposed to Senate Bill 202 and Senate Bill 840. And so while the bills are sitting in revenue, the Senate Revenue Committee, which, as I think you are aware, stays open throughout the entire session, so they could be heard at any time. My sense is these bills are not going to see the light of day again. So the report back from Legislative Committee is we'll watch them, but not expecting any movement on either of those 2 measures. Moving on, there's a couple of bills that I think that are important for us to continue to watch. House Bill 3374A is a bill that is coming out of a freshman member, former county commissioner, Representative Brock Smith from Curry County, who has introduced a bill that does continue legislative efforts around counties that are in fiscal distress. And there's an amendment to the bill that would create a fairly significant incentive for a county to establish a public safety district by January 1st, 2020. And some state funds would sort of help incentivize the existence of that special district for the first 4 years. There's some criteria around which counties can qualify for that grant, and Lane County would be one of them. Not quite clear if this thing can make it all the way to the finish line, given the budget situation that Oregon is in, but the committee recommends that we continue to keep our eyes on it and has recommended a monitor position. Just in the nature of time, I'd like to jump to number 5, which is Senate Bill 845. This has to do with marijuana taxation, particularly state revenue from the marijuana tax, the statewide tax. If you'll recall, the budget, or the legislative priorities that we took early in session involved tracking on marijuana taxes. Senate Bill 845 looks to be the measure that will move. The important thing for the county is that it would take away the restriction on how we spend that money. So under Measure 91, the 10% of the state tax revenue that the county would have received was supposed to go for a particular activities related to a particular set of statutes. That language would be removed, and it would be completely discretionary dollars for the county. I do want to let the board know that I'm very nervous that given the budget situation, we're going to see a notwithstanding kind of bill at the end of the session that sweeps all the state tax revenue. And so some people disagree with me. They think cities and counties share the 20% that we share will be fine. I'm not convinced. I'm going to be watching that one very closely. Item number 6 is the affordable housing fee bill. It's referred to as the doc fee bill. It would double the document recording fee and earmark those dollars for affordable housing. We talked about it because it's still alive and counties are in that discussion. So we talked about it in legislative committee and recommend that we just maintain the current support if amended position on that measure. We wanted you to be aware of Senate Bill 5505. That's the general obligation bond authorization bill. So while it is a placeholder bill at this point in time, those conversations about where the state will allocate money to which projects for GO bonds will be in this measure, including county courthouses, which is why I wanted you to be aware of that one. 2573 is a bill that has to do with manufactured homes. We brought it to the committee's attention because Lane County has so many manufactured homes. There is a measure that would basically increase the value threshold for property tax exemption. And this one is, there is an amendment in the works that would limit it to certain size counties. The Portland metropolitan counties are very interested in this. And that would this bill would have more of an impact down here given the lower property rate values. So we're recommending that we only support it if it is amended. And then finally, House Bill 2122 is a bill that also was through the committee previously. We took a monitor, you took a monitor position on it, I think when I was here in March. And this, the reason we were monitoring it was there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going to happen with the measure. It's a measure that Chair Greenlick of the House Healthcare Committee is a big champion of. As it was initially introduced, it had a number of issues that we were watching. The thing was it got amended in committee the last day of before the deadline without any public hearing. It then went to the floor where it was immediately moved to the Rules Committee for more work. So the bill has got a number of concerns for counties. I think AOC took an emergency call, as they have a process for, and took an opposed position to it. And it will be heard on Thursday in Rules Committee. I'm not exactly sure what will happen there, but the committee is recommending that the county oppose it unless amended. There's some significant things in that bill that probably need to be addressed. So I'm happy to pause for questions, Mr. Chair, if that's okay with you at this point. That concludes my bill review.
Yeah. Any questions on that? Commissioner Lyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so on House Bill 2122A, so yeah, we had special ops on the phone. AOC did vote to oppose, and that was a unanimous vote on the special ops committee. I think you said it perfectly. It's as written, and I think it makes a lot of sense for not only AOC but for Lane County to be opposed as well. I can't thank enough Karen Gaffney, who just supplied so much information to me while I was on the phone, and didn't mean to lead the discussion, but that's what ended up what's happening. So she made me sound really smart, and so I just want to say thank you to Karen on that. But it really carried the day, and my fellow commissioners were very pleased by the overall dialogue. And so big shout out to Karen, and thank you as well, Alex, for the information on that. So AOC is opposed. I do believe that we should be opposed to.
So with that, could maybe somebody make a motion to approve the recommendations in attachment A?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Likens, seconded by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Farr excused.
I'll move on then, Mr. Chair. I did want to, I did hear this morning there was a little bit of a conversation during the public health update about House Bill 2645. That's the drug take-back piece of legislation. It did move prior to the deadline to Ways and Means. So it's sitting in Ways and Means along with a bunch of other measures down there that are sort of being examined for their fiscal impact. But it's still alive, and it is a bill that we took a priority support position on early in the session.
Thank you.
Okay. So the second item is a letter that the committee and staff drafted, and what it has to do with is funding that the county has received for what's called aid and assist. So just a little bit of background here is when a defendant appears in court and their attorney determines that that person may be unable to aid and assist in their own defense, there is a mechanism under Oregon law at ORS 165-370 that allows the judge to issue what's called a 370 order or an aid and assist order that sends that individual to the state hospital to receive treatment, whereby then they can come back down and be ready for their court appearance. This has been a very expensive program for the state hospital to administer, and more and more of these patients are going up to Salem. That's all pure general fund expense for the state of Oregon. And so for a number of years, I've seen these hearings in Salem where the state hospital superintendent has been talking about the impact of aid and assist patients within his or her operations. In 2015, as part of the Oregon Health Authority budget, the legislature allocated $4.1 million to try to see if there were a way to deal with these aid and assist patients more on a local level rather than at the state hospital. And the Oregon Health Authority identified 6 high-sending counties, of which Lane County was one of them, and divided up the $4.1 million amongst those counties. I think they actually also paid for a partial FTE at the Oregon Health Authority out of that money. In that mix, Lane County was not quite sure how they allocated money to us, but the upshot is we got just under $400,000 of the $4.1 million for the biennium. And we had been, the committee had brought forward to you some positions on, there were a couple aid and assist bills that were moving earlier in the session, and I saw them as important because I wanted to be able to continue this conversation about the $4.1 million, trying to see if we could get a more of an appropriation for that this session. Those bills failed to advance. The OHA is the center of the big budget hole, so it's very unlikely that we'll see an increase. The OHA believes that they'll have almost $5.1 million available this session at current service level, if that's what ends up happening for those counties. And the letter before you is a letter to Bobby Green, who's a name that you'll remember. He's now the local government liaison for OHA. He was involved with this thing. And so what we're trying to suggest is that he hear your concern about the relative allocation within those 6 counties. Marion County, for example, we got 400,000. Marion County got just over $1 million. So here's a county to the north of us that we sort of mirror in terms of size that got twice as much money, over twice as much money. And so the letter, in a nutshell, asks him to re-examine that allocation for the next biennium.
Any questions on the letter?
We do have Lisa here if there's any questions that I cannot answer.
The only question I have is before it gets sent, will that struck out want in the first paragraph get correctly deleted?
Yes. The answer is yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. So with that, do I have a motion to approve sending the letter?
Move approval sending the letter.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Likens, seconded by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously, with Commissioner Farr excused. Continuing on.
Yeah, okay. So the last thing is just an update on the transportation package. I think I've gave a little bit of an update in the legislative committee, but there is a joint committee on transportation, preservation and maintenance that was established in this legislature. It came out of an interim work group that was established by the previous legislature. Pretty much at the very beginning of session, that joint committee divided itself into 5 working groups to go out and discuss elements of the transportation package with the idea that they would reconvene later in the session and then start crafting a piece of legislation to be discussed late in session, and that's exactly what has happened. The 5 work groups went out and worked. They each came back with sort of a suite of bills that they'd like to develop. Legislative Council is working on those bills right now. We expect to see either this whole suite of new bills next week, and with the understanding that likely by the end of session these will all be combined into an omnibus transportation package that's one bill, and very well may be one of the very last bills voted on during the session in order to get to sine die. There is a number of different elements within this package that we expect to see, but it would result in the analysis that I've seen pretty much in a similar amount of revenue to Lane County as we would have seen had the vehicle registration fee that we proposed in 2014 passed. So in terms of trying to bolster the road fund, this transportation package could be very good. There's a couple of different elements that we're still watching, and I'm not exactly sure how they'll show up in the bill, but one of the work groups was dealt with congestion. And eventually they started to talk about the Delta Highway Beltline interchange and the project that is in the offing for improving that interchange. So we will likely see some funding in the bill for those kinds of congestion choke points around the state. There may be a mechanism where locals are asked to put in some of their own dollars, the local skin in the game, if you will, to ensure that the state money flows. And so there is talk about new taxation authority for the MPO, the Metropolitan Policy Organization. And then what has not been quite clear is whether that taxing authority will be then voted on by the MPO or imposed through the state. And this is one of the details that I just haven't sort of hearing mixed messages on here in the last couple of weeks. So we will see the bill early next week, and I'll make sure to get an additional update to you on the transportation package. But so far, so good. If you recall, there was pre-session, we were thinking about a $300 million to $600 million annual package. And what I'm understanding is that it would conceivably start at about $385 million and ramp up to almost $800,000 per year over 10 years for a total of a $7.3 billion investment. So it's a very significant piece of work that the legislature has been working on. A lot of unknowns, a lot of growing tension up there about budget and expenses and various things. So it's just sort of a wait and see at this point in time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Thank you for the report.
All right, and if I might, I was instructed to seek head nods for you on one final issue that had to do with a piece of correspondence that that I received from the Department of Interior, the BLM, and it was discussed in agenda setting this morning, is a request by the BLM for the county to enjoin as a cooperator status with a project that the BLM is looking at in Western Lane County that has to do with a dam, the Holt Dam in Western. It's a management plan for Western Lane County, and I think the idea was that we could draft that. This does require 30-day acknowledgement of receipt if we want to be that cooperator. So the idea was to get this back in front of you in a future meeting within that 30-day window. We need 3 head nods to do that.
So I'll support that. It looks like I've got Commissioner Like and Commissioner Williams nodding your heads, and it looks like you got 4 head nods up here. So, yeah.
I think that concludes my.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I appreciate BLM for doing local coordination and cooperation and developing a plan. So with that, I'm going to look at the administrator. I saw you whispering with staff out there, and I saw Lydia saying she can't wait till after lunch. So with the indulgence of the board, I think we're going to move on to items 6C, D, and E. And I'm looking also to see whether or not Mr. Russell can be moved in the afternoon or not after executive session, because the executive session is kind of a 1:30 time certain. So he's nodding yes, and I think some of the other things like consent calendar and commissioners' announcements and all that can wait till the afternoon too. So let's deal with items 6D, E, 6C, D, and E, and get those done, and then we'll take the lunch break. Are we going to handle these as one item or 3 separate? Do we have to do 3 separate votes?
Thank you for asking. I'd like to clarify in the interest of time that I will speak to all 3 agenda items at one time, given the nature of the request. We have 1 applicant, 1 subject property, and same type of request. So the fact pattern is the same and same issues for all 3.
And we will then ask you to do separate
Motions, yeah.
Yes.
On each order.
That makes sense.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, I am Monica Witzig, planner with the Land Management Division. Item C through E we've discussed as similar to previous matters heard by the board regarding appeals of land use applications and involve whether or not to conduct on-the-record hearings for these 3 appeals. They were decisions by the hearings official. And in the interest of time, I'd like to reiterate 3 separate actions, but 1 presentation. The planning director's decisions each approved 1 replacement dwelling in the exclusive farm use or EFU zone. The hearings official's decisions affirmed the planning director's decisions with modifications to conditions of approval. The applicant and the appellant both appealed the hearings official's decisions. The various assignments of error raised by the appellants upon appeal of the planning director's decisions to the hearings official remain open on appeal and generally fall under 2 different categories, not to oversimplify the efforts involved on both parties in preparing statements. The first of which, the applicant discusses whether, or the appellant, addressed whether or not an applicant can lawfully replace a dwelling that has been removed for 20 years. So that's the first on appeal. The second issue on appeal relates to the timeline specified by Condition of Approval 1, within which the applicant is required to construct the replacement dwelling. The applicant also appealed Condition of Approval 1 upon the hearings official's modification to the director's decision. The focus of today's presentation is to address the 4 criteria that determine whether the board will elect to conduct on-the-record hearings. The criteria are found at Lane Code Chapter 14, Section 600, Subsection 3. Each of the 3 matters before the board do not meet the criteria based on the evaluation presented in the memorandums. I'm happy to go into detail. The memorandum does specify each criteria and whether the request meets that in great detail, and I'm happy, again, to speak to those. In summary, though, I'll just relay each of the criteria. So 1, we found that the requests are not of countywide significance. The second is that there's no need for the board to provide policy guidance, and the issue will not recur with frequency. The requests do not involve a unique environmental resource. The planning director and hearings official do not recommend on-the-record review. In addition, the applicant and appellant have both expressly requested that the board adopt the hearings official's decisions as the county's final decisions. Accordingly, the planning director recommends that the board proceed with option 1 presented in the memorandums, the effect of which will be to adopt the orders electing not to conduct on-the-record hearings for the appeals and affirm and adopt the decisions of the hearings official as the county's final decisions. Thank you for your time. I am available to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you. And before I go to the rest of the board, I want to declare ex parte contact in this matter. The King family are longtime friends of mine, and when they first had issues with trying to replace these dwellings, they got me involved in trying to troubleshoot the process of getting a permit to do the replacements, and ultimately got into this land use application for the replacements. So I have had conversations with the King family in the past. I do not feel that that contact, though, affects my decision on whether to elect to hear or not. The criteria for that, particularly seeing both the applicant and the appellant have asked for us not to hear. So I just want to make sure that's clear that I have had contact with the King family about this particular issue. So any questions? Commissioner Lakin?
I don't have a question, but I'll make a motion. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval order 17-05-02-03 in the matter of electing not to hear appeals of a decision affirmed by the hearings official approving a replacement dwelling in the exclusive farm use zone pursuant to Lane Code 16.212 subsection 5 and B, Assessor's Map 18-11-08, Tax Lot 200.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Lakin, second by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Farr excused. Commissioner Lakin.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval order 17-05-02-04 in the matter of electing not to hear appeals of a decision affirmed by the hearings official approving a replacement dwelling in the exclusive farm use zone pursuant to and same Lane Code, so on and so forth.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Lakin, seconded by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Farr excused. Commissioner Lakin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move approval 17-05-02-05 in the matter of electing whether electing to not hear appeals of a decision affirmed by the hearings official approving a replacement dwelling in the exclusive farm use zone pursuant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Second.
I'm looking at Andy. Are you okay with that?
How specific?
Given that the full title is in the record and in the
okay.
Yeah.
I think we're okay.
Yeah.
It was read once.
Thank you. Been moved and seconded by Commissioner Lakin and Commissioner Williams. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously with Commissioner Farr excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry we kept you into lunch. So with that, I'm going to recess the Board of Commissioners meeting and read us into executive session. We will reconvene at 1:30 in the Board of Commissioners conference room for executive session. And then after executive session, we'll come back out into regular session. I will try and give Metro TV a heads up, like a 5-minute heads up, and we'll finish our this morning's agenda, including our dog licensing discussion. So the Board of Commissioners, the Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 1926602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed above. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions will be made in executive session, and we will be coming out into regular session after executive session. We are recessed until 1:30.
In the boardroom.
Yep.